Good morning, everybody. Good morning, good morning, good morning. Did you guys all have a good weekend? Whew. I feel like I'm getting behind. Trying to stay ahead of you guys. But boy, has it been fun. And it's definitely helping my own goals, which are to put more structure around the stuff I've been teaching for 6 or 7 years. And add some stuff that I hadn't had before. So I don't know if you guys saw, this is all pre, I don't know about that, but I'm just chatting for another 5 minutes here. But, at the risk of losing the fish, poor fishies, to the new Carlos. So a number of other, I'm just going to talk about administrative sort of changes over the last weekend. As this is our first boost. It's the first time I've ever tried to stream this much content in this amount of time. First time I've ever streamed content. Not to mention, I made YouTube videos before, but, so there's a lot of adjustments during this whole thing. It's been really exciting. But so here's some of the latest changes, and I swear I will never talk about these administrative things once we get going on the boost, which is going to start in 5 minutes. I think you're doing is really great. Oh, thanks. So first of all, I just barely published today's outline. I knew what I was going to do this week for some time, and anybody who knows what the Linux Essentials is, will know that really that's what we're just doing. We're just kind of trying to cram all of the content from Linux Essentials that is not covered by the book next week that we're going to start going through, will be covered hopefully this week, or at least you should cover it, and we're going to talk about that. But I did do one particularly big change. It's something of a commitment, and I put tentative in there because I'm a little worried. I don't know, man. It's like, it's a lot to commit to, but I feel like it's the right thing to do. And so I want to show you the schedule change. Where's my mouse? I can't even find my mouse today. Here it is. So we have getting started. We did. And getting started, we did a lot of things that are like little previews or peeks of other stuff that's going to come. And that's all well and good, but it doesn't go in deeply. So I don't want anybody to get frustrated by not knowing how to bash script after last week, for example, or still maybe even struggling with Markdown a little bit. We're even going to cover that again. So it's basically just, hey, let's do stuff and get excited. That's what last week was for. And this week is going to be a little bit more thorough, and so are all of the other upcoming weeks. They're going to go down into the weeds a little bit more on this kind of stuff. Although the overall course is not meant to be down into the details sort of course. It's supposed to be, kind of a high level. A lot of people wouldn't call it high level. In fact, I know a lot of people who've gone to college about this stuff who would think this is very low level, but it's not. It's designed to be higher level. Anyway, so one of the big changes I made, and I'll just mention it quickly, is I did something kind of weird at the request of one of the people that I private mentor has been here for 6 years, and I really appreciated his input. I put this in the Discord, but I'll just let you know. I put creating command line utilities in Go right after bash. At the end of, if you want to understand why this decision was made, you can kind of listen to the conversation at the end of the day on Friday, which was the last video. And where I talked about how we kind of got dragged into learning bash first as a first language, which I would never recommend to anybody as a first language, strictly speaking. And so I was brainstorming with many people about how we can pull your head out of bash and into something that's a more serious language right away, so that you don't think of coding in terms of bash going forward. However, bash is, it's fun. You use it every day. We do it on the command line every single day, and all of our configurations and scripts and everything that we did the first week are built based on this. They're built based on you know, bash. I mean, you're lying to yourself if you're telling yourself you're not using bash from the first day. As soon as you type ls into the command line, you have used bash. So might as well learn at least the simpler parts of bash. So I only have 2 minutes to describe the rest. So that was the first change. So I decided to stuff Go in here 1 week of Go. And this is going to be very, very high level Go. We're not even going to do packages. All we're going to do is how do you make commands in Go? How do I make Magic 8 Ball in Go? How do I make a web scraper in Go? How do I use Go packages? How do I make Go as a better bash when bash doesn't do the job? And frankly, Go pairs really well with bash in that regard. All right. So, and then the other change, so that meant that I had to cut a week from Go at the end, which should not be a problem since you have already done that for 1 week. Just start using the flag package from the standard. Yes, we're going to use the flag package from the standard. I'm going to show you about my tab completer, but we're also going to use getOp and learn those kind of things. So you need to know them even if I don't like them. So these people know that about me. The other big change is I actually went ahead and put a tentative annual schedule down. So this is actually something that I'm going to start talking about officially at 11:10 here as we start. Thanks for the gifted subs. So okay, here we go. Everybody, if you're here, welcome. We're gonna officially start here in 4 seconds. And the first thing I want to say is that the tentative annual schedule for all of the boosts is up. It's tentative because this is just me like spitballing at how the time breakdowns would work. But I'm kind of excited about it. We have our Linux beginner boost, assuming that finishes in 16 weeks. Well, I'll take a break between. We can all take a break, and then I'm gonna do mastering algorithms with C, and that's a specific book that is widely regarded as the best book, period, on data structures and algorithms. And so it is not for the faint of heart. It's going to be, I'm going to try to simplify it as much as possible. Myself, I'm going to be going through the review as well. It's been a very long time. In fact, it's been over 20 years since I've used data structures and algorithms in C. It's been over 10 years since I've written any C professionally. So I'm actually kind of excited to go through that book with you guys. We're going to try to cram the whole entire book. It's like 500 pages into 4 weeks. I imagine a lot of you who've been to university and had computer science courses will be, able to help the rest of us. But that's what that's for. And so then we're going to go to October 5th. We're going to do HTML5 Phaser 3 game development. Now, this is a surprise to a lot of people who've known me on the stream over the last couple of months, 3 months. I used game development as a way to get beginners interested in coding and computers in general. And the number one, I've used all kinds of things. I started out with GameMaker, which is a disastrous application I won't talk about. And then I went to Unity for a while, and then Unreal Engine, and all along Phaser 3 has been there. We've used that as well. Phaser 3 is a really great sort of Flash replacement in the HTML5 game world, if you know what I'm talking about. These are usually 2D games. And Phaser 3 is a really fun little engine. I actually sponsor him on Patreon. And it's a fun little engine. I thought, what more crazy thing to do in October when everybody else is making silly, zany kind of mods for their favorite games. Everybody gets a Hollywood, kind of a seasonal upgrade in Halloween time. And so, so we're going to go ahead and do game development for 1 month, for 4 weeks. And then we're going to jump right into beginner boost and get all serious again in November. Take a break. This means we're going to be running over December. I debated about whether to close down over that time, and the decision is going to be no, because a lot of you are going to want to use that schedule, that vacation time, to do your thing. And then February 22nd, we're going to do algorithms in C again in February, and then I'll, in springtime, we'll come back in March and do some more game development. So this puts 2 boosts per year, 2 algorithms per year, and 2 Phaser game developments per year. Okay, Phaser 3 game development really takes a lot of JavaScript skills too. To recollect what they learn, yes, they do. There needs to be a break where you can kind of digest what you're going to do and everything. I don't want to keep it too intense. I also, as you notice, I've spaced out, so there's 2 different Linux boosts. If you're not interested in the game or mastering algorithms in C, that gives you a good solid, 3 months in between the boosts if you want to do the boost again. Welcome everybody. Hi, Scream. All right, so let's get right into it. Today is going to be a lot of talking today, and that is because we are WK01. Oh, I also renamed a lot of things, so if you guys see anything broken, apologize. I set some policies about contributing, and I made it so there's no more than 12 characters. I mean, lots of little administrative things. If you want to know about them, go join the hashtag contributors room. If you want to. So this is I know nobody probably has seen this yet. I just barely started it. I did week 1. I need to do week 2. There we go. And so I really just have I know what we're going to do each day in general. So I need to get the specifics down, just so you know. So this week, first thing we're going to do is do a lot of talking. We're going to do the Linux deep dive and cover what it is, all of that, how to certify, if you should certify, blah, blah, blah. That's today. Tomorrow is going to be spinning up a Linux cloud machine, and I'll show you how to do that. I'll actually do it, and if you want, we'll even make a Minecraft server. I already did that this weekend to test it. It's actually really fast now with Paper. Paper's all pre-compiled. So, I mean, you can spin up a Minecraft server in, 20 minutes. It's really fun. We may even use a Minecraft server as an example of that, just because it's a fun activity. And we're going to be using DigitalOcean. We won't be using Linode, even though Linode is awesome too. Just so you know, if you want to get it, we will also not be using AWS, but we'll talk about cloud versions of Linux. Day 3 is going to be virtual machine installs, virtual machines all day, which means, not to dox yourself, yes, virtual machines meaning how do you do a virtual machine? What is a virtual machine? Why do you care? And how does that relate to Linux? Some of you may already be running a virtual machine right now. Day 4 is bare metal. The whole day is about running on bare metal, hitting the problems with UEFI, how to set up your boot order, how to create a thumb drive with Etcher and not some of these other atrocious, USB tools that are out there right now. Etcher's really the leader, even though it's Electron. And this is day 5. Day 5 is everything about software package managers, and I felt like that deserved its own day because package management is probably the second most important thing you'll learn about Linux besides installing it. And it's generally the first thing you have to know after you install it. Like, how do I keep it updated? When it comes to security, we really need to spend a full day just talking about how to keep your system up to date and what that means. Hey, welcome everybody. So again, let's get started here. I don't know how much of this will get done in the first segment, but we'll see. So why does Linux exist? And I want to just talk, we're going to talk about this a little bit again when we talk about this, when we go through the essentials checklist, but why does Linux exist? I had somebody ask in the Discord the other day. In fact, I think they're still posted there. Why does it exist? What is its purpose? Why is it there? And I think somebody in the chat actually said that the story they use is like, well, every time they get asked that, they say you got asked that, in any area, it's like, well, why does it exist? It's like, I see that Windows needs to exist and Mac needs to exist, but why Linux? And so when a common person asks you that, because they don't know, a muggle, I guess, you should probably for GNU Linux. No, we're not going to ever refer to it as GNU Linux. That is a stupid way to refer to it because it discounts all the contributions of everybody who has contributed to Linux who's not part of the GNU project. We're going to get to that. That is a real sweet spot that I used to actually believe that. And after reading William Schott's excellent explanation about that, I will never call it GNU Linux. And frankly, I judge you if you call it that. Yeah. So we're gonna the Discord info. Just click on chat. It's a big old panel down below, and it'll take you right to Discord. Okay, so we've got is not GNU anymore. Well, there's a lot of questions there. I'll let you guys talk about it. I don't want to get sucked into the weeds too much on this. Let me just finish this overview, and then there's going to be a lot of discussion today. So okay. So the first thing that we should probably talk about is, and by the way, this is covered. Let me go ahead and pull this up. If you really want the best I think one of the best write-ups ever about this question of Linux. Let's see, PDF Linux, the Linux command line. So this is the book we're going to read next week. I'm really sorry for the blinding white screen, but this introduction to Linux and the Linux command line basically covers it. So let's see. I want to tell you a story, not the story of how in 1991 Linus Torvalds wrote the first version of Linux kernel. You can read that in a book. Not how Stallman started the GNU project. We're also going to talk about that. No, I want to tell you a story about how to take back control of your computer. And that's really what Linux is about. It's about taking back control. And so if somebody were to ask you, well, I've never heard of Linux. Why would I be interested in it? The reason that you should be interested in it is because you've never heard of it. Because Linux is everywhere that you don't see. So Linux is behind most web pages. Linux is behind, is embedded into, traffic lights and weather systems and your most video game system consoles. And you are using Linux every day. Your refrigerator has Linux in it these days. Not to mention your gambling machines, everything. So Linux is the operating system that's running the world. Android is actually Linux. People don't know this. People call Android an operating system, and that's kind of a stretch. It's not. Even Code Academy called it that. It's not. Android is a framework or an applications framework, or if you want to call it that, that's running on top of Linux. Android is Linux. And now we're going to talk about how it's now Windows. So, Polish Parliament uses Linux for voting. It's everywhere. So that is why Linux exists. It exists everywhere, except the desktop speech. Yes, and it really does. I mean, it really does. And I think the beginners need to understand this. And if you are a beginner watching, you'll be like, where are the clouds made of, Dad? Linux, son. It's true. It's kind of true, actually. So let's kind of move on from that. But so I didn't have to put a dig at Mac here, of course. I have Macs. I have lots of them. But Macs are not Linux. Okay, I just want to be really clear here. A Macintosh, people mistakenly think that the terminal on a Mac is Linux. It's not. It's not at all Linux. It's something called Darwin, which is their sort of like horrible name for FreeBSD, which was a free operating system that Steve Jobs stole. And that's a quote. I'm quoting Steve Jobs at that point. He stole it in order to put it inside of Apple and make, and he basically started Next Computer. And then he started, he took Next when they begged to get him back to Mac because they tried to make an operating system with object-oriented technology, which completely failed. And so then they brought Steve Jobs back, and he said, only if I can bring my Next operating system. So he brought back Next, and they were really awesome. There's a really good link. This is a really common link, actually. This Linux Timelines link is a good one. So I'm going to go ahead and pull this up. This one seems like it's the most updated, and it's only getting called GNU Linux because of Stallman, even though I seriously disagree with calling it that. Because, and here's my main reason. I don't see it called GNOME Linux. I don't see it called KDE Linux. I don't see it called Systemd Linux. These are all things that were developed. If there's one critical system to Linux, these days is Systemd, whether you hate it or not, right? Was that developed as a part of the GNU project? Hell no, it has nothing to do with GNU. In fact, GNU, the elements of GNU that you are using in your system are dwindling smaller and smaller every day. And the more code that's getting rewritten is Rust, you watch. The amount of GNU software that's left over in the Linux operating system is going to diminish even further. I would suggest that the amount of code that you actually run that's coming from the GNU project is down around 50-60% at this point. So it's not fair to call it GNU Linux anymore. It hasn't been for a long time. And so if you're calling it that, then you're giving too much weight to Stallman, who was the one who, actually started the Free Software Foundation. He deserves all that credit. But it's not fair for us to say, besides the kernel, the total MIPS running, the kernel is like way more important. And that, Stallman's off his rocker on that thing. I love some of the things that he's contributed to the world. Oh, right. This makes Debian the basis of all Linux. Okay, thank God not. All right, so we have Slackware here. This is a really, really good one because it does show everything that's ever existed. Thank you very much for this resource. I'll make sure to link it into our source. But you can see there's your Android right there, guys, that I talked about, right? So this is probably the best breakdown. Thank you very much for this. This is the best breakdown of distributions that I found, and it seems like it's the most up to date. This is a really hard one to keep up to date because stuff is changing constantly. In fact, I'm trying to decide if this has CentOS on it. Better. If it doesn't have CentOS, it's not up to date at all. Parents of Slackware narrative. No, it's Debian. Yeah, Debian is these days is the biggest. Is the biggest ancestor, I would say, and that's switched over after Red Hat became so proprietary, and Slack. So here we go. Wow, Snake Oil OS, Pop OS. Whoa, this is super up to date. This even has Pop OS on there. Holy cow, this is fantastic. Thank you for this resource. Ubuntu Mate, there it is. Ubuntu. Yeah, all of this is based on Ubuntu, which is got its own story, and I'll try to get back on track here. I don't want to talk about specific distros just yet, other than to decide why we've picked how to pick a distro and what distro to use. And you'll notice that later on in the day on the schedule, I put fight about your favorite distro. So we'll save that for that time. Okay. So that is a fantastic link. Thank you for putting that in. I'll go ahead and bookmark that. And I'm going to go back to, let's see here. Where are we? So, and then Debian Spin, that's an interesting one. Haven't heard of that. So yeah, we can talk about all kinds of stuff. Let's see. Desktop Linux has less than 2% market share. Windows has 88 of desktops and laptops. Yeah, I agree. I probably would agree with that. That's a really great link there. So where is Linux being used? It's definitely not on the desktop. I don't think anybody would debate that it's actually truly made it into the desktop yet. It has for us, though, and it has for lots of developers. And frankly, you can use it to your advantage. I'm going to say something controversial, but the people who know how to use Linux and operate with it, they outdo other people a lot of times. I'm not just saying that because I use Linux. I've seen other people go up against people who are using Linux, and depends on what you're trying to do. But generally speaking, Linux gives you superpowers that none of the other graphic operating systems can give you with regard to most operating system and development tasks. Not all, but I mean, there's a lot. So it does give you a lot of power there. That's why it exists, and that's why you should use it. So we have to go into the history, but before we do that, I think I'm going to change the order here. I want to jump right into the certification material normally and discuss this, and the reason for that is because I believe I believe one of the best ways to organize your study of Linux in general is to follow the nonprofit Linux Professional Institute, which is a worldwide organization centered on Linux education and Linux certification, which is all over the place. And they are on this. I mean, they are constantly updating. And so let's talk about that for a second. That link's broken, but if you just do a search online for Linux Essentials, and one of the first things you'll pop up is do not do anything for the CCNA with Linux Essentials. So I mean, it's just the reason that you want LPI stuff is because it's also not associated with any single vendor, and that's really important because you don't want your certifications being tied to a particular vendor, at least not in this field. So this is sometimes Linux Plus used to be based on this. In fact, there was a break. I don't know what happened, but it used to be that LPI ran the Linux Plus certificates for CompTIA, and then there was a split, and I don't even remember if they still use Linux Plus in CompTIA now, but just don't get it. The one you want, in fact, don't get anything from CompTIA. CompTIA is a disastrously horrible organization, and the stuff that they have been pushing is absolutely horrible. I strongly encourage you to just bypass CompTIA any time you can. It is they have lobbied they've tried to sue people locally in local city councils. They've tried to push forward laws that would cause people to be sued for opening up their own hardware manufacturing shops. They are a soulless, horrible organization who wants you to fill in all the blanks the way they want them filled in. And yes, people learn from it, but I am going to personally suggest strongly with everything I have in me that you do not get a CompTIA certificate, that you do whatever it takes to not get that unless the government requires you to get it, which again, they have made a nice sweet deal with the government because it means they get lots of money. So anyway, LPIC is not that. Now, even though you might have to go to Pearson to take the certificate, the Linux Professional Institute is not that. So when we talk about, as soon as I pull up anything around certificates, including the first week I streamed, should I certify? The question comes up, and I've actually made an entire video on this, which I won't pull up now, but if you go to the YouTube or to the VODs on Twitch, you can search for the video called Why Certify, and I'm going to go ahead and pull that up. Not just, well, I guess I could just skip it, but the long and short of it is you should certify. I think it's in my old one here. I haven't ported this one over here. If it's not the first hit, then we'll just skip it. Nope, it's not there. So I have a diagram on this particular thing, but if you go watch the video, you'll see. I don't want to go into deep detail on here. Again, I want this to stay on topic. The why certify comes down to how are you going to get a job? What's going to create trust? The reason I'm on the certification page right now is because unlike many other certificates that you might go for, this certificate provides a very detailed, at least more than any of the others, outline of what is required to pass the test. And so this can provide some structure around what you need to learn, what you want to learn. And I'm trying to find out, actually, let's see, where is it? There is another link. I'm not seeing it now. It's in I have my iPad here. Let me see what it is. But they have a wiki that they use. You remember that whole crowdsourcing knowledge thing? Well, they're doing that. And let's see. Let me go see if I can see this. Our certifications, Linux Essentials overview. Okay, yeah, we're on that. All right. So, I must be missing it. Oh, here we go. It's kind of hidden actually. Here it is. About LPI. So if you click on About LPI and you go Exam Development Wiki, this wiki shows all of the Linux certificates. Now, how far should you go? How high should you go if you're going to get a certificate and all that? First of all, you have to ask yourself if you even need a certificate. If you're just starting out, you might not need one. But it's a good way to structure your knowledge. And I think that getting the Linux Essentials isn't a bad thing, because it's a lifetime certificate. You don't have to renew it all the time. And it gives you a lot of structure to your learning. And this is why I'm showing you this. So they have created a free and open source wiki that has all of the objectives of the test in it. And it talks about how they're going to make the tests, what's going to be on it. It tells you the weighting of the content, like where you should put most of your time. Look at this, guys. Command line basics has got a weight of 3. It's the hit most. Turning commands into a script, weight number 4. So it tells you how to study and how to gear your knowledge. So this is one of the reasons you're not going to see a lot of structure from me about general Linux education, because it's already covered. I mean, this is like really, really well covered. Even if they don't answer every single question for you and they don't cover every little detail, they give you really solid structure on what the entire Linux worldwide community feels like you should know. And it's something that I find fascinating about that, and also a little telling, is that you will not find Arch on here anywhere. So, and I actually think that we can talk about that later when we fight over distros. I think that might be a symptom of some problems with the LPIC or the LPI organization in general. Are they just clueless? Are they not paying attention? Is it because it's not required for industry knowledge? What's going on there? And that'd be a fun topic to get into. But let's not get into it right now. Let's wait off. Let's save that for at the end of today in our final segment. We'll have some fun talk about distros and why you think a distro is best. And really, guys, you can put the gloves on. Gloves on. Make sure your gloves are on so no one gets killed. And we can we can punch it out about what your favorite distro is later today, as long as we stay friends, okay? But I really think that kind of debate is a good, healthy thing to help beginners find their favorite distro, as long as you don't talk down to anybody about their distro. So look forward to that. We're going to do that in the last segment. But so let's use this as a structure for what we're going to talk about today too. So I'm going to pop back into the outline that I have here. I covered why Mac is not Linux. I think it's important to talk about why Windows is becoming Linux. And by the way, we're going beyond just getting a terminal. Getting a Linux terminal is a different topic from getting Linux. It is the fastest possible way to get a Linux terminal and start working on things. But it's also not necessarily the best way, because it might just be a terminal, and we can talk about that. But I want people to recognize that Windows subsystem for Linux is Linux. It's not some pretend Microsoft version of Linux. It is Ubuntu Linux, and the subsystem 2 coming out is pretty damn good. It's fast. It's an actual kernel. It's not even emulated anymore. It's running right on the hypervisor, as I understand it, which means that it's very efficient and fast and does what you expect it to do. And so the whole world is frankly looking forward very, with this sort of, and I guess we just really want to see what Microsoft's going to do here. And I got to tell you, as a guy who was once very, very anti-Microsoft as the devil kind of in the 90s, calling Linux viral, Steve Ballmer very famously, hating on Linux big time, it's not the same company. So I just want to say that Windows is actually a better partner in the Linux world than Apple. And Apple is actually actively campaigning against Linux. They've removed the Linux shell, Bash, from their operating system and replaced it with a much more permissive license they can mess around with, Z shell, which is a horrible shell that nobody should ever use. Z shell is the standard Apple shell from now on. That's what you can say. Bash is the standard Linux shell. If you want to learn Apple's standard shell, fine, but you are not learning Linux. Z shell is not Linux, and I'm just going to stop there. All right, so Linux certifications are not going to give you tests on Z shell. They're going to give you tests on Bash is what they're going to give you a test on. So that's one of the important reasons for that. Okay, so let's get down into it. So Linux certification, should you do it or not? Let's just go over what they are really quick. So I don't think any Linux certification is worth looking at other than the Lpic certificates, because they're coming from the Linux Professional Institute. And so you're not going to hear me recommend anything else, but that's up to you. This is just my opinion here. And so Linux Essentials is the first one. It covers kind of well, here's what it covers right here, right? It covers Linux operating system, basic command line usage. Basically, I'm a Linux user. Security and file permissions and safety, and that's it, right? I love the candidate description. Just barely qualified to pass the Linux. This hypothetical person is called minimally qualified candidate at MQC. Standards on the Linux Essential exam should be set so the person, anyone would pass, but anyone less able would not pass. So I love that they're very open about their standards, about who's going to pass and how you should prepare. Try to find this kind of information about A+ or any other certification out there. Doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. And if it does exist, it's in a book that's going to cost you $100 as a prep test. So I'm just telling you, I just love the LPI as an organization, even though they might be falling behind a little bit on this whole Arch stuff. The MQC has an understanding of the Linux operating system and industry knowledge of the most open source applications. So they want you to know applications, which is why you guys will remember that I have rwx.gg/essentials. And this, on my essentials list, I have the essential applications, which I think you should know. And included in that are like LibreOffice, Glimpse, Inkscape, Audacity, Muffet, browsing. Some of these tools, none of them are proprietary, but some of these tools would actually play into Linux Essentials. They're going to ask you, you've got this hypothetical scenario. You're a sysadmin or something, and you're helping somebody define what application should they use if they want to edit, files, if they want to edit photographs, and they'll ask you things like that. So, they want you. So here goes. Rudimentary skills, free and open source, various communities and licenses, which we're going to talk about today in the next segment. How am I doing on segments, by the way? Okay, good. Processing programs and components of the operating system, all the pieces that go together, what's RAM, what's a file, what's a directory, that kind of thing. Computer hardware, as I just mentioned. And in this sense, people actually will say, well, should I get a Linux Plus or should I get an LPIC 0 or should I get A Plus? And A Plus is very Microsoft specific. It has a tiny little section in it on Linux, but it's almost all Microsoft. So system security, users, groups, file permissions, make the system accessible and be able to connect to the local area network, which we talked about. How do you use your network? What is the network? How does it work? Open source applications, the workplace, closed source equivalents. So that's LibreOffice, all of that stuff that I've listed into the essentials thing. File system browsers on the desktop. So which kind of desktop, what kind of browser, what's a desktop environment? Do I use i3? Do I use GNOME? All of these things, you need to know all of these things. And frankly, I'm going to tell you right now, the best way to know them. The best way to know them is to sample all of them. So the rest of the week, as we talk about how to sample different versions of Linux, I want to outline for you what I suggest is the best way to prepare for this stuff. And you might not like it, but it boils down to installing one of everything. Install, so I'm going to give it to you right now. So install 5 operating systems into a virtual machine, okay? Install maybe 2 or 3 cloud-based Linux operating systems, and then install like 5 operating systems. They could be the same ones, but server-based on hardware. Find some old hardware and do it. And people are like, I don't have the stuff to do that. Well, you should be. If you want to get the next certificate up from this, you definitely need to do all this stuff. And then after you install all those things, and by the way, you should be installing both servers and desktop distros and get yourself familiar with how to use them. And you should install at least one package, and you should install at least one like daemon or server based, like as a secure shell or something. So once you go through that, I've had lots of people over the years do this, and everyone who has gone through that and taken the test has passed. So, but that means that you're basically lining up a bunch of installs, mess with it, delete it, install, mess with it, delete it, install, mess with it, delete it. And as you go through that process, you'll become really familiar with how the different distros feel. And this kind of essentials exam will be really easy at that point. And that includes like, how is SUSE different? We're going to talk about distros later. How is SUSE different than Red Hat? Then, what are the different desktop managers? What is the difference between Cinnamon and was it LFC, LXC? Where do you go for help? What is the man page? Make a simple restore and backup. How do you make backups? What's a basic command line editor? Okay, use a basic command line editor. You notice it doesn't say VI. We're going to use VI. There's Nano and is the one that they want to talk about. So you should at least understand that Nano exists. File compression. How do I compress and decompress files? How do I create or run a simple shell script? So a lot of this stuff we're not going to cover this week because we're going to cover it next week and in the weeks following, going through the book. But the stuff we are going to cover today and over the next week is these other kind of questions. So today, for the rest of the day, I really want to cover this stuff about the history of Linux and the community, what open source is. So that's 6.1 in their objectives list. I want to cover, we're not going to cover finding your way nor power of command line. You know about that. We're going to cover a little bit of the Linux operating system, like what distros are. But where is it? I thought there was another section here. Oh no, here we go. Major operating systems, licensing. There it is. So it's part of 6.1. Okay. So we're going to talk about licensing. We're going to spend a good time talking about that. So just to recap on the certificates thing before I leave this thing is, so number one, there is a Linux certification process. You may decide to do it or not. Even if you don't decide to do it, you can use this outline, this wiki, to guide your learning about Linux in a way that professionals have already decided is, the standard level of knowledge and skill. So you don't need to have you don't need to kind of try to figure that out. It's already been written down for you. And so even if you decided to certify, you should definitely follow something like this as a guide. The second thing is, what other certificates are available. So there's the LPIC 1. This is the Linux System Administrator. And this is a big certificate that comes in 2 parts. You have to take 2 tests. If you get this is like people become Linux SREs or Linux system administrators, and this is, a first step towards getting that. The LPIC 2 is pretty much the standard in the industry for saying I am a Linux professional. That means in the old days, like you want to say I'm a Linux system administrator, this is the one you had. And there's no doubt just having an LPIC2 by itself will get you 90 grand a year in America as a job as a system, or an SRE or as a system administrator. So, how do things start up? How are they running? But I do configuring RAID. See that this is not the kind of thing that we're ever going to talk about at a beginning boost. RAID is how you break up multiple disks in a way that if any disk fails, the other ones are still okay. These higher level things, ironically, are actually easier for you to understand if you learn Linux through Arch, because you'll have had to have installed your own Linux and built it with vanilla Arch. But ironically, you won't see Arch listed anywhere in any of the certificates. So, I mean, when they go back to this distro, they actually list, they actually back on this page, if you scroll down some more, they have some more stuff here. I thought I had it. Where is it? Exam pricing, objectives. Here they go. Here's the objectives for this exam. And they are listed out in lots of, this is an outline from their website that is basically an easier way to read the stuff that's coming from the wiki, which is like a living document. It tells you, so see, there's no operating system there for that. There's no Arch there. Mint, Scientific Linux. I've never even heard of Scientific Linux nor used it. So, I mean, I do think that this data is a little out of date. I am somewhat concerned. I'm just going to say right now that, just like any certification, it might be falling behind. I don't know that, but I wonder sometimes. Here's like the applications. So GIMP is Glimpse now, Perl, Python, PHP. How to use the different package managers. So this is kind of an easier to digest way to do this. It's actually really hard to find though. So let me show you how to find it. So you click on certifications, Linux Essentials. See, there's your other certs, by the way, administrator and engineer. I would never get any of these 300 certs. If you're going to get this kind of stuff, then you should have other industry experience, or you might want to consider like security stuff. No way. I mean, I personally would not be as interested in these. But somebody can tell me differently. The Linux engineer, or the Linux LPIC 1 and 2, these have been around for a long time though, so they're very trusted. And that's really all a cert is for, is to establish trust. So if you can do that other ways, go for it. I never got a cert, and I was a system administrator for years for IBM. So 0 to 10, 1 to 60 is so that if you click on that link, then you get the breakdown. What is Ubuntu, Debian, LTS, blah, blah, blah. All right, a little bit of a time check here. So, no, there's no containerization in anything. However, I do think knowing containers is minimal Docker and container knowledge is super essential. And that's actually, I'm glad you brought that up. I think that might be one of the areas that we're starting to see. Maybe they're going to add to that. They do have Linux in the cloud here. So distributions embedded, and we're going to talk about the cloud. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. Tomorrow is Linux in the cloud day completely. And so we'll talk about how to use that and how to get it sped up. All right. So, free software licenses. I wonder if there's anything else here we can talk about on this like overview 40-minute segment. We have a little bit of time left. And then we're going to jump into to the licenses and legal, which, and the open core business model. And I tell you what, let's do 20 minutes of history. I'm going to give you the world's fastest version of history about where Linux came from. And I'm going to get some things wrong. No, we're not going to cover IP tables. IP tables is not a beginner tool at all. IP tables is something you should know if you want to go into it, but it's not required. If anybody wants to know how we're making these decisions for what's here, just go look at target occupations. So rdbx.gg/occupations, and that will show you the occupations that we are targeting here. So some of these things, so I think, for example, that even if you're a full stack web developer, that you need to know Linux Essentials. The end. So here's the target occupations. So a web developer, this is like, it's a full stack web developer. Full stack web developers do need to know about Linux. I'm sorry, you do. You need to know about Linux. If you don't know about Linux, you can't really call yourself a web developer. I'm sorry. People are going to take me to task. Well, you don't need it. You can just use VS Code. Yeah, but you can't really call yourself a professional until you understand the web server that your stuff's going to be running on. And most of those web servers are going to be Linux, not all. So if you really are, a holistic full stack web developer, I hate that term, then you need to know Linux. And you need to know Linux essentials. Do you need to know how to use IP tables? No. IP tables is not required. In fact, the only thing here that's probably needed IP tables is site reliability engineer and system engineer, maybe. Security analyst, possibly. Software developers don't need to know it. So anytime you ask a question, if you're on the stream and you want to say, why isn't Mr. Rob covering this here in the boost, it's because it doesn't equally apply to all of these skills, all of these target occupations. And that was just because there's so much stuff to cover. I mean, think about all the stuff that's out there. You certainly need that for other things, but I'm not going to put that in the boost. You can do that. And you'll notice, not even Python's here. I think that should be the first language you learn after you finish the boost. But it's not here because it doesn't apply equally to all of them. All right, so back to what I was saying with the history of Linux. So here's the world's fastest history. I don't have any pretty illustrations. You can do your own research on this. I encourage you to use today to do a little bit of reflection and maybe watch the two people. In fact, since with my 10 minutes left, I want you to at least see the two primary creators of GNU Linux, okay? And I'm going to say the original GNU Linux. And I've already ranted about why I don't call it GNU Linux, because I don't think it's fair to all the other contributors to the whole project. But let's go through, and I just want to show you some video of some relatively recent video of Richard Stallman. And I'm going to start with Stallman because I do think Richard Stallman gets credit for being, for being the sort of the first one. And he clearly is the most adamant about the open source free software. He hates the term open source. So I'm going to turn down this for right now. And I'm not going to show you much more of this.
Another obstacle is there's hardware we don't know how to write free software for because they won't tell us how to use the hardware.
Okay, we're not gonna go into this deeply, but I strongly recommend you watch at least one of Stallman's videos, preferably this TEDx Geneva one, which talks about free software and what it is. It does get a little bit crazy at the end. I mean, there is one point where he suggests that everybody who writes software is obligated to share their software with everyone else. In other words, if you bring your code to class, you're obligated to give everyone in the class a copy of your code. And that's where he really loses me. I mean, it's straight up communism. And I'm a Russian major. I lived in Russia. I know what communism is. And, so there's something about the free market and owning your stuff. But his ideas... So, people bag on Richard Stallman all the time. So why does Richard Stallman matter? Okay. Richard Stallman was the guy who's credited anyway as creating this idea that we should give software away. And so I'm going to do this as fast as I can. I'm going to look at my clock because we only have like five minutes or so. So back in the day, all there was big old Unix systems, and they lived on AT&T computers. Unix was invented at Bell Labs, which it used to be the Palo Alto of its time. That's where Unix was invented. Ken Thompson and all the guys, Robert Pike, all these guys who invented Go, by the way, they were there and they made an operating system. They made Unix at AT&T, and they built it in assembly at first, and then they wrote the C language so that they could rewrite Unix as in C. So to this day, C is really, really super important. So they wrote Unix operating system. It was used only by big companies on big iron hardware. And I'm just going to really paraphrase, but you were lucky to use it if you were in a university. So a lot of people in universities got their first access to it. It was a multi-user system. Thousands of people would be on the system at the same time, which is ironic because these days people that are using Linux are usually just one-user systems. The smaller that Linux gets, the deeper its concentration, the less you don't have to you don't have to have multiple users on the system. But once upon a time, it had lots of users. And so when you see Linux with permissions and stuff and users and all that, you got to remember that it came from that time. In fact, that's where email came from, sending messages between systems, and the @ sign indicated what system was going to be on, and they added the domain later, the .com and .edu stuff. So that's where it came from. Along comes, and by the way, there was a lot of other free stuff going on. So there was another Unix-like operating system called FreeBSD at Berkeley that was their project, and they had to give it away for free because it was a university project. So they did, and a lot of this work was related to the government, but not necessarily for the government. So along comes Richard Stallman. He's like, you know what? Kind of that time, it's like, we need to make this free. We need to make something that everybody can use. There was another operating system that was underway doing the same sort of thing at Stanford called Sun. Stanford University Networking, I think is what Sun stands for. So Sun Microsystems started there at about the same time. It was another Unix operating system, and it was getting popular. And it was free, but it wasn't free. I mean, it was more of a groundswell, but people couldn't use it and not pay for it. And if you guys have watched Last Miles on the streams, he's a big Sun OS user. It was Sun OS and then became Solaris. So that was another one around the same time the Linux came out. But all that time, everybody was like, man, it would be really great if there was a free version. I mean, like a truly free version. And so enter Stallman, and Stallman comes in. He and his team created, Emacs and a bunch of other tools. Probably Emacs first because they needed to have something. They created the GNU compiler, GCC, and they made all the tools so that they could make all of the tools that AT&T Linux Unix had created. And Bash, born again shell. And so they made all of these tools from the very beginning because in a vacuum, so that they didn't have any legal entanglement with AT&T, so that they could create the first true free operating system in history. And let me just take a moment to pause here. A lot of people give Steve Jobs and Bill Gates credit for like changing the world and doing the right things. I don't see Steve Jobs and Bill Gates having entire business models or shaping the way that we release copyrights for the world's literature into Creative Commons. And in the next segment, we're going to talk about how the Free Software Foundation, the Free Software movement, despite all its problems today, it started this movement. Stallman is the only human who can, in that realm, who can take, despite what you think of him, he is the only human who can take credit for having shaped and changed the way the world looks at business, writing, in addition to how we look at software. He changed everybody's view on this, so much so that some companies have died because of it, and other companies have been born because of the open core business model, such as what GitLab is following. We're going to talk about that in the next segment. I'm going to take a break here, but it's important that you know about Stallman. I understand why he rants about GNU, but so there was one. So he'll talk about it. I'm going to summarize where Linus Torvalds comes into this. So he spent all of his time making all of the useful user stuff. Like LS, and in fact, to this day, if you do like a man on LS, at the bottom, most of the man pages, if you go to the bottom, you'll see where they were created. You'll see who the author was, written by Richard Stallman and David Mackenzie. So the LS command used every day was written by Richard Stallman way back in the 70s. And so it's important that we don't discount that contribution. It's a pretty significant contribution, but it's not the only contribution anymore. So the one thing that they did not have time to do because they were too busy doing other things was what? They didn't, I got to take a break. They didn't do I'm going to talk about Linus Torvalds in 1 minute. They didn't have an operating system. I mean, they didn't have the kernel, which is the main piece of the operating system. They had all this stuff on the outer side edges, but they didn't have the kernel. And so what did they do? He said, okay, we need a kernel. So there was no internet back then. And so somehow, and I don't know how, frankly, I should probably learn that, he ran into Linus Torvalds. And Linus Torvalds only cares about the kernel. That's his only reason for living until he wrote Git, right, to manage the source code for the kernel. So this is Linus Torvalds. And I'm not going to talk about him a lot more. He's obviously the namesake for Linux, which is why it's not Linux, it's Linux, because his name is Linus Torvalds, because he's Finnish. And so he came along and he spent, his professor taught, I think he actually created Minix, And so he was really, really, really into kernels, and he did Linux in his spare time because the one thing that drives Linus Torvalds crazy is stuff that's inferior. And he thought, he made jokes even about his professor's Linux operating system being inferior. And so he wrote a thing saying, hey, I've made a better one. Go try out Linux. And Linux was just a kernel, and it didn't have anything around the edges. And frankly, Linux couldn't be bothered to do all of the, the menial writing of PS, and LS, all that stuff. It wasn't fun to him. He just wanted to do kernel writing. So there was a natural, sort of relation here where Stallman and Linus came together and they created GNU/Linux. And that was how Linux was born, and it really exploded onto the scene after that. And they had a very cordial working relationship for a long time. Actually, it's kind of interesting. If you want to have some real fun, and then I got to take my break. If you want to have some real fun, go watch any videos where Linus and Stallman are in the video together. Because Linus Torvalds is very conservative. He's not very conservative, but he's more conservative. He's still, he's liberal, but he's conservative. Let's just put it that way. And Stallman is the opposite of conservative. I mean, he's probably one of the most liberal human beings you'll ever see. But when you see the two together, like when they're at conference presentations and they're on stage together, I don't know, but I think that their relationship has degraded with this FSF crap over GPL3 to the point where they don't even want to see each other anymore. They're so dramatic. In fact, Linus has called the FSF unethical and called them downright liars about the release of GPL3, which just leads into the conversation in the next hour about all the licenses and all the legal stuff that goes on with Linux. That's been a really whirlwind thing. If again, the whole point of these boost conversations is to get you excited enough to go doing your own research and doing your own learning. But you should really spend some time to understand why not call it GNU Linux. There's the first chapter in William Schott's Learning Linux command line book has a section just on that one thing. And do your own little research. Maybe understand who they are, where they came from. We're going to bring in people like ESR, Eric S. Raymond, during this stuff next. I am going to take a 10-minute break. And then I'm going to go. I think Stallman. No, I don't. I think Stallman was eventually kicked from the FSF. Yes, I think he stepped down. Okay, so I'll let you guys talk about that. Turn back some music on, and I'm going to go take a quick break. And when we come back, we'll get into the licensing, which I know is a hard thing for people to understand. And if there's one thing I understand, it's the licenses at this point. Having worked for IBM. Yeah, I think he was finally forced to step down. So was ESR though, too. All right, so fish. See you soon. Just the kernel. I know. Okay. Oh. What are you guys even talking about? Okay. Yeah, there's a couple of good choose a license sites out there. This is a standard one. I think this one is the one run by GitHub. Gotta be wrong. Yeah, there it is. This is the GitHub one. So, GitHub has done a really good job documenting the licenses and helping you pick one. GitHub has kind of the same thing. But when we talk about licenses, we need to talk about more than just software licenses. And I don't have a document on this yet, but the general categories of licenses are proprietary, free software or non-permissive, and then open source or permissive. And so the word permissive is thrown around a lot here. I just want to make sure that's in this conversation. In fact, I use it here. I want it simple and permissive. I care about sharing improvements. So, or non-permissive. And you can think of the licenses in that sense. So, first of all, what is this whole copyleft license kind of thing? And so, is piracy a license? No. So, licenses are, if you don't know, a license is a way of releasing your software or giving something that you own, that you legally own, to somebody else. So whether that is copyrighted material that you own, or it's some writing that you own, or it's anything else. These days, it's also important that you understand patents. So patents are completely different from licenses. But if you own a patent, so basically anything you own, you can give away or release as under a license, and that includes patents. So patents, copyright. I mean, even real world goods, if you wanted to, you could say, hey, you can use my bike under this license, right? Like, you can't do whatever. So that's just the general sense of a license. And I'm telling you that intellectual property is a joke. Yeah. So, and what is intellectual property? So let's talk about it. Intellectual property is stuff you've invented, ideas, anything that's written. I think it's really important. I actually was developing a game some time back, and I found out that you cannot patent the idea for a game. It's very, very, very hard. And but you can copyright a game. So that means that the actual written instructions and everything about how to do the game can be copyrighted. So that means people can't produce that copy in any way, that writing in any way. But you can't actually copyright the idea for the game. So this is why you see Connect 4 everywhere. Everybody's making a Connect 4. They don't need to have a patent to make it. But this is actually going to come into play when we talk about software licenses and stuff like that, because there are certain things that can be patented and other things that can't. And the idea that patenting is just a big... Oh, thanks. The idea of patenting is just a big mess anyway. Because when you look at it, you're thinking about, what is going on with all of these patents. So, like, for example, Amazon famously patented clicking on one button and having it buy something. Well, and so I don't want to go into the weeds on that, but the whole topic of patents, of software patents and intellectual property, is a massive, huge, controversial topic that is debated ongoingly all the time. Just so if you're coming to the industry and this is your first time, just know that is a big part of this. You saw me the Oracle versus Google lawsuits. The idea of even doing it, Microsoft has released all of its patents as a strategic move, some think, to shut down smaller companies that need IP to get started. It's a huge topic, and I don't want to go into the weeds on that, but just know that it is huge. There's one other thing before we get into licenses that I really want to warn you about, and this is coming from experience at IBM. Okay, and if you're a beginner, what I'm about to tell you is going to potentially save your career, so please pay attention. If you look at proprietary software in any way, shape, or form, and you want to work for a company that's producing competing software to that product that you saw that's proprietary, you have become tainted. And as soon as you are tainted, you have basically blackballed yourself from being able to work anywhere. And I want to just warn you, as we go in as a junior programmer, I cannot tell you how many times beginning brilliant people find themselves into a corner because they have chosen the wrong projects to work on, or they've worked on the projects in the wrong way, or they weren't fully aware of the risks of working on proprietary software. Now, there's lots of ways around this, and in Silicon Valley, they're very creative. They have a thing called there's like different, depending on where you go, the laws are all different. Some laws, they won't even, I think in Silicon Valley, I think it's a 1-year waiting period. And so like places like Google will put you on, they'll put you on a bench for a full year, and they won't even let you work on anything, or you'll work on something else while the, whatever the laws are lapse, so that you are able to work on a competing project. Usually the reason they're going to want to hire you is because the thing that's really ironic about this is the thing you're the best at is likely going to be the reason you're going to get hired by another company, and yet that's the thing you can't work for the other company about if there's been a non-compete. or any kind of contract involved. And that is why I'm glad you brought this up, Oggs, keeping me right on track here. We're going to talk about the licenses next, but the most important thing for beginners out there that's not covered anywhere is the importance of you knowing what you're getting into. So when you sign a non-compete, I will not sign a non-compete under any circumstances. I would rather work for another company than sign one. Another thing that people have you sign is an NDA. And the reason they have you sign that is because they're afraid they're going to show you something and you're going to go out and do it. The danger with an NDA is that if you sign an NDA, they might show you an idea that you've already had and already done something with, and now all of a sudden they can claim that your idea is not something you can work on. I had a bunch of rather young startups in the area come down and try to present to me this really awesome, cool idea for an app, and they said, I sat there and I was super excited to see it, and a friend had recommended I look at these guys, and I mean they were really excited, and then they stuck an NDA in front of me, and I said sorry, and I just walked out because they're like, well, no, it doesn't mean like. I said, yeah, but I there's no way that I don't know that I'm not going to have your same idea or that I didn't already have your idea. So I don't. Yeah, there's lots of specific examples of this. But let me just say this. So there's two specific legal documents that you should really, really think twice about ever signing. One of them is an NDA, and the other one is a non-compete. So that means you're not going to do it. But the truth is that most places, marriage, yeah, if you actually get into, let's say you're starting out at a company. So when I started at IBM, when you sign on for the company, they have you sign a bunch of stuff in the orientation, and a lot of it they don't talk about. And that's not unusual. I'm not singling them out. That's just my experience. And some of the stuff that I signed there said that they owned every idea. I kid you not, people. They own every idea I had on. It specifically said on or off the clock. On or off the clock. That means the concept of working on side projects and open source projects, and every single one of those things, you had two options. You lied about your participation in it, and I know people who did that, or they would say to you, you need to get legal approval to work on a specific open source project, period. And so what I'm trying to say is, when you work for some of these bigger companies and you're trying to, examine what that means for you, it's actually not that unusual to do that. It's that every single big company wants to own you. They own your intellectual property. They own your thoughts and dreams while you're there. And actually, at the time, I was a much more concerned. Like, I was always kind of over freaking out about, am I doing the right thing? Am I breaking a law here? And I felt, I don't want to understate the amount of pressure that is on somebody who's a law-abiding citizen who's trying to do the right thing. When you're trying to organize, I have ideas all the time. I'm constantly writing down and working on little things, and the idea that none of those ideas belong to me really started to wear on me psychologically. Psychologically, it started to wear on me, and I was like, I can't act on any of these ideas because I don't own any of them, and they own them. And I actually, I'm going to share a story that might get me in trouble. I won't even say the project, but I actually did the right thing, and I approached the legal team about my release of something called the Perl classes Pragma, which is like really old and outdated and not used anywhere else. And it was this really awesome Perl library for basically doing mix-ins and Ruby-like things with Perl. It's still out there. You can go look at it. And I contacted the legal department, and I asked them straight up. I said, can I participate on this? I tried to do all my things. And I actually had an email trail going with this. Is way past like statute limitations at this point. But I contacted the guy, and I sent some email to the legal team, and the legal team said, can I set up a time to talk to you by phone? So the lawyer from IBM called me on the phone and says, dude, it's not that big a deal. Just do it. Just do it. Don't ask me about it. Just don't make a big deal about it. Just do it. And he didn't even say, I'm gonna deny this. But it was pretty obvious from the phone call nature of it that is like, dude, I know you're trying to do the right thing. And I was like really badgering him. I mean, this is a lawyer who's probably got many other things to do. And I was sitting and say, dude, can I please release my little tiny, it wasn't that tiny, but can I release this thing? Can I release this thing? And he's like, dude, it's just no one cares. Just do it. And you know, it's like everybody does it, but nobody talks about it. And I was like, and for me, I was Mormon at the time, okay? And so you gotta understand, I'm not Mormon anymore. But at the time, for him to say, just nobody cares, to a Mormon is not a thing. I mean, it was like, you can't tell me that just because you're telling it to me, okay? I'm like, I signed in law, my blood, saying that I'm not going to break the IBM law. And it was a big deal for me. So I'm kind of off in the weeds here, but hopefully this personal anecdote kind of thing can help you understand when you're going into the legal thing, go into it with both eyes open and know what you are okay with and what you're not okay with. Because if you don't, one of three things can happen to you. You can be fine and never be caught. You can end up doing something that inadvertently causes you to be unemployable by anybody else. So if you don't like your job, tough, you got to work there. Or you can actually have legal action taken against you, and they can own you and take everything away from you, like they did the guy that used like a couple of lines of Java code when he remade Google's version of Android operating system using Java. They made their own version of the Java engine, and they sued him over it. Oracle sued him over it, and they won. So how about software licenses? Now we're going to do software licenses. So as you get into the software license, you need to know why software licenses matter. And that's why I told you all those stories, just in case you're wondering. Those, we can cover licenses in 30 minutes, so we're fine. But the reason you care about the licenses is because the licenses directly affect your ability to produce software and be paid. And that, for most of you, I imagine that's a big part of your goal, is to be paid to write software of some kind, even scripts. So you want to make sure you go into this with your eyes open and you know what the licenses are about. So when we talked about the breakdown of the licenses, we talked about permissive versus non-permissive. And then we talked about the community. So you can go through and look at all of these. And I'm not going to deal with them in large depth. I will say that I'm going to jump straight to the gun and suggest my favorite licenses based on lots and lots and lots of research. My favorite permissive license is Apache 2. MIT license is the popular one, but it's not popular with the people who care. When you pick a license, by the way, you want to pick a license that is popular with lawyers, not with people, because the people, they like this nice short license that I don't have to put there. But you know what license is better than this? The Apache Foundation license. And I believe I wrote a whole blog on Medium about this. The Apache 2 license is the best permissive license on the planet. And the reason for this is because it's long and long-winded and super, like blah, 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 blah. You know why it's a good license? Because it's long-winded and because it gives grants of patent license explicitly. MIT doesn't. So the Apache license is the most popular, the most with lawyers and the best vetted by lawyers. And you might not like Apache. Who cares? It has nothing to do with the Apache Foundation. If anything, it shows that they know what they're doing because they've been doing it for 20 something years. And this license has been really crafted well to appease people at the big companies, IBM and places like that. So, and by the way, the decision for picking a license is largely based on what you fear most. And let me qualify that statement. If you fear no one's going to use your software, you want a very permissive license. They're not going to use your package. They're not going to use it. And you want them to use it because you want to, for whatever reason, you want to put your name out there. You want to change the world. That's why you should write a permissive license. If you're the most afraid of people not using it. If your fear is, I'm afraid Apple is going to steal my software or someone's going to use my software for free, I'm never going to see a dime about it, and they're never going to give back and contribute. If you're afraid of a world where large, huge organizations continue to abuse people, take their ideas, put them out of business, make trillions of dollars off of it, and continue to go on their way, then you want a non-permissive open source license. And that's a tough one, because sometimes you fear they won't get used. Sometimes you fear it's going to be used by everybody. Okay. And that's why GPL2 is so popular with people, because yes, you can use it, and you can, if you make any changes, you have to give them back, but it's not it doesn't strap you down in additional ways like Gpl v3 that it does, which we'll try to talk about now. So that's what's going to, and then if you're like, your fear is, I just don't want to have to mess with licenses in general, then you might release it to the public domain, which is just a way of doing that. So there's three things actually, but two main things that licenses protect you from. One of them is being sued, because people can sue you if they use your software and it doesn't work. And two of them, and the second one is, your rights, like you're protecting your rights to the software. Like if you make a change, I want to get my change back. And so those are the reasons. If you really want to, so in addition to software, there's something called the Creative Commons. And so the Creative Commons license is, I like it because I like the process it takes to help you figure stuff out, because the cognitive process of deciding a license is largely the same thing for Creative Commons. Creative Commons covers written content, so like sound, audio, written words, not source code, but it's the same kind of idea. So you have the Creative Commons for that kind of thing, and then you have the software licenses for the other sort of thing. What's the difference between free software and open source? Free software is, what the Free Software Foundation counts, which means that anybody who makes any change has to give all their changes back. It's called copyleft. That's not permissive. Open source includes the free software one, but it also includes any of the permissive licenses. And Richard Stallman is really triggered by open source. He doesn't think anybody should use it. Because he started FSF, and the open source movement can't really be credited as really starting in one place. Although Eric S. Raymond, who wrote Cathedral on the Bazaar, S. Raymond, I'm just all over, but that's fine. The Decline and Fall of Eric S. Raymond. This is kind of a sad thing. Lately, he's been in the news a lot. But this book, The Cathedral on the Bazaar, was one of the first books that defined what it was to be open source. And basically, all you need to know is that open source means permissive licenses that allow you to sell the software, are as well as any changes you make without giving your changes back. Those are the permissive licenses that are included in open source. So here's the process for deciding which license works for you. So you click on share your work here on Creative Commons. It says create a license, choose your features. So let's go ahead and get started. And the other one is also good from GitHub. So it's license features. So your choice of this panel. Allow adaptations of your work to be shared. Yes. Okay. If you're allowing adaptations, that means that they can change it. If you put no, then they can use it, but they can't change it. No derivatives. There is no such thing as no derivatives in open source, as far as I know, in terms of software, but there is in terms of writing. And then you say, can they use commercial versions? Yes. And this is like non-commercial. Oftentimes a license will say it's a non-commercial. None of the open source licenses state anything about being commercial or not. Let me just say that I personally believe you should never put a non-commercial use in your license, because it's far too restrictive, because you just have no idea how the stuff's going to be used. And if you're going to do the open source license at all, but some people feel more strongly about that. And then let's go back to the other choose license. So this one says Attribution International. I like this one. Yes, as long as other people share it. Attribution Share Like 4.0 International. This license is almost exactly the equivalent of Gpl v3. So we're going to say, what was it? Let's see. Wait, where was that link that we were just on? I'm trying to find it. The Apache license. Kind of all over today. MIT, there it is. So choose an open source license. The reason I don't like this is it suggests MIT for everything. It's like GitHub is MIT crazy, and I think the Apache license is better personally. So I want it permissive. License preferred by the community. Apache requires Apache 2 license. GNU recommends GNU GPL3. I don't know if we have time to talk about GNU GPL3, but we probably should talk about it. Do we have enough time? I think we do. It's OSI, the open source initiative. Yep. Because yes, he was triggered. We're not going to. This makes a question of OSI and their decision. Yes. On open source hardware, I've never heard I like the idea of open source hardware, like Purism has, but I don't even know what licenses that they're using for hardware. Does anybody happen to know? RISC-V. Anyway, there's been a lot of controversy lately in the open source initiative because of the ESR was banned from it. At this point, both of the founders have been banned from their organizations. So Stallman was removed from his organization, and ESR was removed from the OSI. So I'm not going to go into the weeds on that. I'm going to let you guys talk about it. I do think that we need to spend at least 10 minutes talking about the difference between GPL and GPL3, because this is supposed to be about Linux, and the Linux operating system is released under GPL version 2, not 3, and it will never be released under GPL version 3. However, all of the GNU software, including Bash, has been released under GPL version 3. So what is the difference and why do we care? This is probably one of the hardest things for people to get their head around entirely. But as you're going to start releasing software here pretty soon, it's really important to understand it. In a nutshell, GPL2 has one goal. If you make any changes, I want the changes. That's it. That is, and Torvalds says it practically just like that. And there's a really great video of Linus Torvalds talking about his aversion for GPL3. Doing the research though on GPL version 3, there's a lot of FUD out there, by the way, about GPL version 3. It's not as hard as you might think. So TiVoization is the first word anybody says when they talk about GPL 3. And that's Stallman's term that he invented to talk about what happened when TiVo released their set-top box with open source Linux operating system software on it, that if anybody changed anything on the chip at all, there was a burned in checksum that would fail and your device would stop working. And that launched a massive controversy and debate, because effectively, and TiVo made all of their software available, they complied with all the terms of the GPL version 2 license by giving everybody any changes that they made to anything. But they also said, you know what? Our exact version on this device is going to be soldered onto the chip, and if anybody, or not soldered, it's going to be burned into the chip that's going to be soldered onto the board, and nobody can change it. And TiVo cited security considerations and a bunch of other things as a reason for that. But the Free Software Foundation says, oh no. It's like part of the whole point of free software is the right for the user who owns the device to do what they want with the device. And this launched into a major debate that is still ongoing about what are the rights of the owner of the hardware. And this enters into the whole iPhone fiasco and everything. It's a huge debate. You should at least know the broad strokes of what this debate is about so that you can form an opinion. I tell you right now, I still do not have a strong opinion about the whole thing. I go back and forth a lot because, but it's important that you understand it, because when we talk about Linux, which is what we're talking about today, you are going to see software that's released under GPL version 3 and GPL version 2. According to Linus Torvalds, the iPhone security stuff. So you see so iPhone and the whole, do you own your phone, or are you just really effectively renting it from your service provider? That is really the conversation going on right now. There are a lot, backdoors and all that stuff, right? There are a lot of people out there, companies that look at you owning the device, even though you pay the money for the device, you don't own it because the thing doesn't operate without Microsoft or whatever, and you can't change the batteries, you can't do anything to it. So right to repair is a really huge legal thing right now, and it's also the number one reason that I hate CompTIA, besides them putting out a horrible test, is that they're advocating that nobody should have the right to repair or even open their own devices without being authorized by them, paying your $800 for a test and getting authorization to repair your own devices. And if they have their way, they have very explicitly said that this is dangerous for society, that you should not have the ability to change your stuff, that the companies are to be trusted more than you. This is a Louis Rossmann thing. Yeah. So no, that is exactly the Rossmann thing. So this is a huge debate right now. This is a huge debate. Who can we trust? That's what the debate is about. Do you trust the manufacturers of your devices and the software running on your devices? Does society trust them? Or do they trust the people who own the devices to be able to do what they want to with the hardware that they've purchased? Do they even really effectively own their devices? This is a massive debate in the legal system right now in IT. It's probably one of the most significant ones going on right now. And right dead center in the middle of that is Linux. And if you want to know why Fuchsia is getting so much attention from Google, is because Fuchsia is entirely released under a permissive license. You can say whatever you want about it being better or this or that. I believe personally the reason Google Fuchsia is getting so much attention is because the entire operating system is released without a single non-permissive license. This is also the reason Apple is getting rid of Bash and doing Z Shell. They won't say that explicitly, but that's why. Because Bash, the newest, most recent version of Bash has version 3 in it, which scares the crap out of Apple because it's much more far-reaching. And we're going to talk about how it's more far-reaching. So when we talk about these legal issues, we're back to GPL version 2 versus 3. I'm just going to, in a nutshell, say why Linus Torvalds, he's not even mad about GPL version 3. What Linus Torvalds is mad about, and you can watch his own words say this, is he's mad about how they released GPL version 2. All GPL version 3. All GPL version 2 licenses from the beginning of time have had, and almost all of them have said this GPL version 2 or later. And so if you read the license text for the GPL2, it says or later. Okay? It says or later. And so Linus Torvalds' single biggest complaint, the reason he calls the FSF liars and doesn't want to have anything to do with them anymore, is because they deliberately released GPL version 3, which is a separate license in his mind. It's a fine license, he says. It's just not a GPL v3. It's a completely different license, which should have been done completely separately. But the FSF, according to him, they snuck it in, and everybody who had one of those old V2 or later licenses now automatically applied V3. And as soon as they applied V3, it changed the nature of the V2 license. And that specific thing is the thing that makes Linus Torvalds like go ballistic. And it's the reason he doesn't want to have anything to do with the FSF again, according to his words. So whether or not you think the two are going, that little release of V3, for him to state so emphatically that it's a different license is completely accurate, because this is what it does. That little question about whether you have the right to edit the software on your device is that, so the GPL used to be, GPL version 2 was like, if you make any software changes, give me back the changes. Yeah. If there's a great video on it. So if you don't make any changes, I mean, if you make any changes, I just want back your changes. That's it. That is it. That is GPL version 2. GPL version 3 says a bunch of other things, but it says that, you know, if you make any changes, you have to give me them back. And then he also says, and by the way, you have to allow anybody to access and change this software on any device ever. Basically, it went forward and it said, you can't change, if you release your software on a device with this license, that device must allow the user to change the software. And the contention is, that has nothing to do with the software anymore. That has to do with the device, and that is TiVoization. TiVoization, which is Stallman's word, is to say that, those one things. I don't think Linux is dead by a long shot. A lot of people do. If you think Fuchsia is going to replace it, you're full of it. But so the Linux is still going to be around. But what I think might come, we're going to see other new operating systems, and we're also going to see operating systems eventually that are going to get rid of GNU. And so I don't know what's going to happen here, but there is definitely a big enough rift between the Linux kernel and the GNU project that there are lots of really important people thinking about replacing the GNU software, the v3 software on some Linux distributions with versions that are entirely GNU v2, the original intent, without the TiVoization stuff. Because big companies are refusing Some people are like talking about BSD and FreeBSD, which is another version of Unix that's extremely permissive. But by the way, guys, when you do that, though, you have to think about a world you're going to be living in when you do that. Every single contribution you give to FreeBSD and to OpenBSD is a direct contribution to Apple. You are directly contributing to Apple continuing to maintain its dominance over everybody else. So I am not completely against GPL v3 because GPL v3 is part of a world that I believe in. Do I agree with how they did it? No. But do I want my software to be promoting a world where people continue to take and take and take and give nothing back? I don't know if I want to live in that world. Do I think that I should have access to change my devices and the software running on my devices? Yes and no. Yes and no. And that is a huge debate. I don't want to go into it right now, but think about that, guys. In the world of Internet of Things, what happens if people producing toasters are forced to create an interface? They'd have to add a USB to their toaster so people could upgrade the hardware on the software on their toaster. Now, on the other side of the argument, what about all those set-top boxes with massive security vulnerabilities that cannot be fixed without throwing it away? All of those denial of services, the biggest denial of service attacks in history were being launched by set-top boxes and by violated routers, most of which could not be upgraded. It was impossible to flash them, most of them. So if you subscribe to the idea that you cannot, to a world where you can't upgrade the software that's running on the hardware, you're talking about a world where security vulnerabilities are hard-coded into the hardware and cannot be fixed. Now, the hackers out there are like, hell yeah, that's awesome. How many people do you think are going to go buy a new router because it needs to be more secure? You know what I'm saying? How many people are going to go buy a new router? How many people are going to buy a new fridge because it can be hacked? Now, so this is a huge debate. This is a huge debate because on the one hand, even if the vendor, the hardware vendor, agrees with this idea that every single thing on the internet should be upgradable, even if they think that that's an idea, is that going to be cost efficient? As the size of items goes down to be smaller and smaller and smaller, are those things going to be, and frankly, when people say Linux is dead, the reason they're saying that is because what's happening with Linux, and there's new operating systems besides Fuchsia coming out now, where people are writing operating systems that don't need all the stuff that the Linux kernel has provided to very small operating systems, small devices for a very long time. And so what they're doing is they're shrinking the size of those things. Linux is being put in. You're going to see Linux, or that size of operating system running on, lapel buttons and pins and stuff. As soon as the size of the operating system gets that small, the idea of forcing the end user to be able to upgrade their operating system sorts of dies because the software gets closer and closer and closer to the hardware. It becomes more of a firmware question than anything. And really the question is, should everyone be allowed the right to upgrade their firmware? That's really the question. And as the number of devices gets smaller, and as those devices continue to try to run Linux, now that GPL3 is on them, if I am an IoT manufacturer and I'm producing a lapel pin that has like some sort of like little recording storage or something on it, do I put Linux on it? I don't put Linux on there if I has v3 software on it. So what do I do? If I'm making that product, how do I release that product? I sure as hell am not going to put any v3 software on there. Why? Because I can't provide a way for somebody to upgrade their hardware and firmware on that device. It's impossible. It's so small. So then what? So this is where v3 is just really dead wrong on a lot of things. Now, I know that the intent is correct. I mean, forcing Apple to release, places like that to share your software. But it's a big debate, and this is why some people say Linux is going to die, because people are looking for a more efficient, low-level operating system for embedded devices that does not have all the legal entanglements of GPL v3. And some people have actually really argued that GPL v3 is killing Linux. And that it's actually killing it instead of forcing the big companies to do the right thing. Instead, what are they doing? They're making their own operating systems. They're making smaller operating systems. The whole AWS and Mongo debate. Yeah, it really is. The unikernel. And there's a couple of them out there. My personal hope, I'll say, is that and this is fun. This is a good conversation. Thank you for chiming in, everyone. But my personal hope is that Linux will remain, the Linux kernel will remain, and that GNU will die. And frankly, I want GNU to die. And I don't mean any bad ill will toward any person on the GNU team, but the GNU software is so old and busted in so many ways that it needs to be rewritten in Rust, and it needs to be written with a more permissive license. And we're already starting to see that. Bash, Z Shell, people, I want to believe in Z Shell. I really do. The problem with Z Shell is it is not Bash. It's not Bash. That's the problem. And if it were, I might be more inclined to use it because of that, but it's not. It's not. And, and it's released under the MIT license. So I don't know. Honestly, as much as I hate Z Shell because it's such a crappy shell, if in terms of the licensing and if I had to pick a shell for my lapel pin example, if I had to pick a shell and allow remote access to the thing, if you pushed me legally to produce that product, I wouldn't put Bash on it. Number one, it's too fat. I would probably put Dash on it. Is Dash what license is Dash on? What license is Dash? Please not be GPL-v3. Does anybody know? Dash is the is it MIT? What's wrong with MIT? It's not as permissive. It's not as permissive as you need because it doesn't release patents. You can't. I don't know if you can. That's a good question. I don't know if you can release You can release. Well, actually, Mac tried to do that. And Mac kept their Bash version back level for a very, very long time. Is bloatware in the meantime? A lot of people do think Linux kernel is bloatware, and I don't disagree. Calling Linux bloatware compared to the modern desktop operating systems is a little silly, but calling Linux bloatware in the embedded devices world is very fair critique because it's so big. It's been made to do so many other things. User space is cluttered. Yes. So there's a mismatch between abstract. I'm just reading about this license. Dash is under version 2. Oh my gosh. You guys see this? Fight. BusyBox. All right. So I prefer using a minimal Linux kernel. This is good that we're talking about distros and kernels because that's going to be the last thing we're going to do today. We're going to talk about specific kernels. I think basically, why should it be rewritten in Rust? I personally am. I agree with Linus Torvalds about Linux, the Linux kernel, and the Linux software. And I know that means that Apple could continue to take advantage of Linux and do whatever they want. And I may release some software, like for example, Pandoc. Pandoc is released under a non-commercial license. And so using it, you can't extend it. You can use it, you just can't extend it for commercial usage. But you can use it as much as you want. So the real question is, how is it going to change the world? I think forcing a hardware manufacturer to change the way they distribute their software and their firmware in a software license is overreaching. I think it's overreaching. If somebody wants to release under that, that's fine. I think that is seriously overreaching. It's not the original intent of Linux. And the reason that Linux was adopted by the world was because of its permissive yet give back license. It's kind of this perfect, middle road between I want your changes, but I'm not going to tell you what to do with the software. You see what I'm saying? It's like, if you're going to make changes, you're going to give me the changes. This is also the reason that I'm not a fan of MIT and Apache 2 permissive licenses, because those licenses don't do anything to get anything back. That's like selling everything out and saying, you know what? You can do whatever you want to this license. You can take all our code, and we'll trust you that you're going to be influenced enough by using our stuff that you're going to contribute back your changes. I don't trust that at all. I think GPL v2 was the perfect license. I really do, and I think it's the license that it should be. And so it's actually very encouraging to me to see that the Dash shell is the most POSIX compliant shell on the planet. It's also the shell that your operating system runs if it's a Debian system when it boots. When it boots and runs Debian Dash shell. It does not run Bash. Bash is an interactive user shell. Dash is a system shell. It was stripped down because boot times were way out of the park booting from Bash, which is totally bloated. And so Dash is really exciting that it's released under GPL v2. Because you know what that means? POSIX is the rules of Unix that were originally written up about the compatibility and stuff. And you generally don't need to violate them if you don't need to, but sometimes you might need to. Taking the best of Linux and mixing them, their dev ideas, it might. Who knows? I mean, you know, Azure is important, but I'm really happy to see that there is a really fantastic shell that is really small that is also released under GPL v2. In fact, having read this now, coding for Dash just shot up in my brain like a lot. Not to mention the fact that it runs in less than half the time of my Bash scripts. Now, Bash scripts are super powerful. You guys know I love Bash. But if you can get away with running Dash instead, and this all came about because we use the hypothetical example of if I made this lapel pin that records what I have to say by touching it, if I wanted to provide a Bluetooth shell to the thing, how could I do that? Well, I could put the Linux kernel in it. I could do a Linux from scratch. Which is a way to make it. And then talk about this same point. Nice discussion. Well, that's cool. I'm glad he's talking about it. So you could push the lapel pin, and then it would play Pi 0, right? And then you could put most distros link bin shell. No Debian only. Arch bin sh is bash on Arch, which I found kind of funny actually. In fact, when I found that out, I was the first inclination I had to make my own distro. In fact, I might make my own distro. I don't remember if BOS had a shell. So a couple of minutes here before another break, and then when we come back, we'll fight over distros. Okay? Bin sh is just a symlink away. Yeah, it really is. And I think. You know what I would pay money for in a bounty? If somebody could find a Linux distro that is 100% GPL v2. Can we do fighting distro show? That's coming next. We're gonna fight over distros, right? And the final segment for today is fighting over distros, and so people can help pick the best distro for them and that kind of thing. Dash is good and fast, but for a lot of things you notice a difference with Bash. And you'll beat the crap out of yourself trying to find right splitting arrays. This is true. Final fight. Good old Playmore. Someone probably done it. But see, I'm thinking anyway. In this, yeah. I mean, I think the hypothetical example when we need to think about all this licensing stuff is, and Linux stuff is, I use that lapel pin kind of idea, or that the communicator or whatever you want to call it. Something that small. That's where things are going. What can run on things that are that small legally? And GPL3 can't. GPL3 can't. Yep. So GPL v2 certainly could. The reason I'm really encouraged by this is this means that Linux still has a future in the small devices. Because here's why. Because memory is not an issue even for super small devices anymore. This is why ARM is dominating embedded. So I'm not an embedded engineer, but from what I'm following, doing a lot of research on it, ARM is still dominating the embedded market. So that means, and ARM, by the way, guys, so in case you know, ARM is the same chip that runs in your phone. So it's not an Intel chip. It's a completely different chip architected from the ground up. But it's also not as tiny as the microchip PIC microprocessors, microcontrollers that run in most electronic devices today. So it's the smallest viable full microcomputer chip, and it's called ARM, and they're getting so small now. In fact, I think I have one right here. They're getting so small that most of the Internet of Things world can run on ARM and run a full really trimmed down version of Linux or any of these new operating systems that are coming up. And so the debate is what will be the go-to distro. I actually have a book about writing it's a C coding guide for embedded devices for IBM. I mean, for Linux kernel mods. Does the GPL stipulation require altering? Yes. IBM has. What are we saying here? IBM has Microcomputers, right. BusyBox, that's another one. Requiring that you can alter something easily, or does it require that you aren't restricted from altering it? No, Gpl3, if you put any GPL software on anything, the device you put it on must be able to be altered by the owner of the device. Must be. It's legally, if you put GPL software on a device as a manufacturer, you must provide a way for them to replace that software. That is written in stone, and that's, you know, in the license to prevent TiVoization. So yeah, ARM does not manufacture any chips. Well, that's true, but AMD manufactures the chips these days. I thought it's pretty funny that Intel licensed AMD ARM. Did you see that? Yeah. All right, so I need to take a break. I'll bring back up if you guys are interested in this chip conversation. Let me see if I can pull up my schedule again. I hope you're not lost if you're just starting out, but these are all relevant legal issues. I am constantly changing my opinion on what license to use based on this debate. After the end of this debate just today, my opinion about GPL2 has risen, and until there's a replacement for GPL v2, and GPL is not a replacement. This is the main thing to take away from this. GPL version 3 is not a GPL v2 license. It's a completely different license, and you cannot think of them in the same way. Legally, they are radically different, and that is the one takeaway on that. This is going to be on the test. There is no test. This is exactly what courts are for. The courts, if you're talking about the essentials exam, then yeah, understanding all this stuff is there. The idealization of things, open to interpretation, but you can just say it's under GPL v2, right? Courts are for settling these things in the real world after we write the abstraction of the license. Well, that's true too. It's a terminology that confuses me. The differences lie where, yeah. So, if you want a permissive license, Apache 2 all the way. I am overwhelmingly convinced of that, having actually read lots of legal advice on this. Apache version 2, if you're looking for a permissive license. If you're looking for a license that forces people to give back their changes, as of this moment, GPL v2 is the license that I recommend. If you're looking for a license that forces anybody who even touches your software, including hardware manufacturers, to make sure they give all their changes back, GPL v3, or there's another one called Affero. Affero GPL v3 does even more. So if your software is used on the back end of a web service or some other service, that counts. And that means everything along the path has to be, you can't just, people getting away with using GPL v3 software on servers because other people are using the web interface and they're not actually using the device. And Affero goes one step further and says, you can't even use our software for anything that produces a public interface using a web browser or something, if somebody else is using it that way. So that's another one if you really want to go. And then there's LGPL, which is kind of a weird one. I don't want to get into that one. It's so hard. So LGPL is an old license that says, okay, you can use this library as long as you only link to it. But the idea of linking to a separate library is old. Nobody does that anymore. All the modern technology like Go and Rust, they're all statically linked, so there's no separate library. In fact, I would go so far as to say that LGPL is a defunct license that no one should use today because it doesn't apply to modern computer languages. It applies to old languages that had a separate library that was linked in. And as long as you did the linking remotely, you could do it and get away with it. But all the other software was completely unencumbered by the license. But you cannot do that with Go because it's all statically linked. You can't do it with Rust because it's all statically linked. Most good software these days is statically linked because memory's not an issue. Why not write your own license at release? Well, I would strongly suggest against writing your own license. Writing your own license is fraught with peril because it hasn't been tested in court. And I'm going to take my 10-minute break. So I keep going over my time. I'm supposed to stop at 5:02. I'll be back at 1:10. invalid steps because of collecting licenses. Well, that's a good point, right? So if even one of your pieces of software has a license that does not sync with the rest of the licenses, you're screwed. So if there's one takeaway here, make sure you know what you're using. Okay, so I'll be back at 110. You can watch the fish. Oh yeah. Okay. Oh, I'm back. A little late. This will be fun. Proton VPN. No one set up Proton VPN. Why not? Is it hard to set up? Well, some people set it up, some people haven't. I suggest you set up a VPN. That is pretty much it. The legend, yeah, right. So I'm having a little bit of fun with this last one. Let's see here. Links. rbx.gg/week02. A raid. Oh, nice. Nice raid. Welcome, raid. Just in time to have a good old-fashioned distro fight. The raid is here. So we are doing Linux Beginner Boost Day 6 if you're just joining us. And last on the agenda for this segment is just a good old distro fight. And Distro Royale. What that use? Yes, of course I use Vim. What are we talking about? And so now tell me what you think of Manjaro. What are the rules? Okay, so the rules of this are, of course, attack the distro, don't attack the person. There's nothing wrong with having a good old-fashioned distro fight, but just make sure you're not attacking the person, okay? You're attacking the specifics, and may I suggest that you don't just start with your conclusion. Starting with a conclusion in a debate is like saying Microsoft sucks, right? It like charges people up, it triggers them, but if you start out, and sometimes you kind of have to start with the conclusion, but if you can get away with starting, like building your case, you might actually end up making your case and having people change their mind. And I know that sounds really crazy, but it's actually true. So it's like, so this is what we're talking about. Like Arch. So Arch, to tell you the truth, is one of the things that I want to talk about here. So, let me just, I'm going to make my case for the distros, and I'm actually going to go to, I have a distro page on RBX. If you go to rbx.gg/distros, it talks about the many flavors of Linux. So if you're a beginner and you don't even know what they are, let's start out our 40-minute segment here by just going over the major distros. And we've already seen at the beginning of the stream, somebody linked all of the distros. In fact, I'll repost it since we just got rated. There's a really great breakdown of all of the different distros. I hope I can find it again. I hope I didn't lose it. Is this it? Yes, there it is. So this is the best distro breakdown I've ever seen. I'm really happy that somebody posted it, and it's actually really current. It's got Pop OS even on there, which is I know we're gonna fight to jazz music. So go have a look at that, and just know that this is one of those things. So when I talk about the many flavors of switch it to ragtime, we kind of should, or we should like what's that? I don't know if we have time. Do we have time to do that? We might as well. Why in the heck not? So ready, fight, music. No. Where is the Street Fighter music? We have to have the Street. Oh, I didn't spell right. Street Fighter complete soundtrack. That's not. Is that going to be good? We need Mortal Kombat. This is going to get me muted for sure. Can you even hear it? I can't hear it. It's gonna get me muted. You watch. So back to what we were talking about. Let's go through the distros for the beginners who don't know what we're even talking about. Consider subbing. Yeah, thank you. Oh, that's a good one. We gotta turn that one up. I'm gonna get muted though. I have to talk louder if I turn it up. But it's just so much fun. Yeah, this one will get my mute. I know it'll get me a mute for sure. I know. I don't want to mute the bot. Okay, fine. Okay, fine. We'll go back to what else should we do? Let's do something else. Let's do. Oh, I don't know. We'll do my good old fashioned ones. It's a little bit more Cody like. No, that's not it. No Alan Watts. Not for this. We'll do some of the good stuff. I'll just play all the Cyberpunk good stuff. So this probably won't get us muted. It hasn't so far. Anyway. It's kind of hard to know what will get you muted these days. Documentation is blue. Gen 2. Alright, so let's go to the distros really quick again for the beginners. Ready, go. We only have 45 minutes or so left. And so here we go. And let's see, just left piece. So we have, what is your Linux favorite distro? So the most common beginner distros are Pop! OS, Mint, and Ubuntu, and I'm going to show you what those are. Pop! OS is a distro from System 76, and it is my standard recommendation as of last week. I did a full evaluation of it, and this is a distro that's supported by System 76, which I had a rough time with in 2013, but I understand has changed a lot. And this is a pretty dang good OS for beginners. It's actually got a lot of stuff built into it already that you might want to use. It's kind of an it's a desktop distro. It's not meant to be it's not something that you customize a lot, although you can. The biggest reason I'm going to make an argument for Pop! OS is because it takes care of so many of the hassle. So unlike Linux Mint, for example, which I've been recommending to everyone for years, this, which I love, this actually, I'm running Mint right now, by the way. This actually takes care of UEFI and proprietary drivers and a bunch of things that are a hassle for a beginner that Linux purists might not like that they included, because it is designed to be the primary operating system that they ship on their hardware, on their laptops. You can buy a computer with this on it. It'll cost you more. You can also just download it and put it on, a $300 Acer you get from Walmart. It'll be fine. So if you want to get into the business, this is probably the best distro to go with early on. Linux Mint is another one. So Linux Mint is the one that I have been. Linux Mint Cinnamon specifically is a distro that I've been using for a very, very long time, and has this is a very famous one. It's actually the distro that Mr. Robot uses when he doesn't pop on Kali. Of course, that's probably product placement. I'm sure offensive security people probably paid to have that included in Mr. Robot. But Kali Linux is a security distro, by the way. So we'll jump straight to that. Kali Linux is another popular one with beginners who want to be hackers. Strangely enough, it's not actually popular with really high-end hackers because they'd rather build their own with Arch or LFS or something, but because it comes with all of the tools. Another security distro is called Parrot. So you guys, I hope you're fighting about this while I show these. Parrot OS, Parrot Linux is another Linux-based distro. So far, all of these have been based on Debian, and so they have a consistent way to deal with everything. If you'll remember from the Linux Essentials breakdown, where is it? That these systems, the reason that I suggest you start with a Debian system is because right there it is in black and white. If you want to get the Linux Essentials exam passed, it's based on Debian. There's no Arch here, and we'll talk about that. Linux Mint is specifically mentioned. So I would pick your first distro among this list if you want to work towards some sort of professional certification in Linux, if you think that that's a thing you want. And that's why I don't recommend Arch to beginners above all, because it's a good way for you to sample a system that's easy to use and also a good way to get started. However, if you don't care about that and you really, really want to learn and just suffer through it, you might want to try an Arch-based distro. And all of the Ubuntu distros, as we saw in our big, huge map, are based on Ubuntu. Did I lose it? Where is it? Here it is. So here, the only real distros on this page that still are big contenders is Ubuntu. The entire Ubuntu family. This I don't think anybody would debate that Ubuntu is the biggest distro right now, and it's very really closely running against all the Red Hat based distros, which run inside of big companies. And all of these distros, as you can see, are based on Debian. That means that they have a Debian package manager, so they're using apt-get to install things, and the packages end in .deb. So any of the Debian-based distros are monstrously huge right now. So like on DigitalOcean, you'll see Ubuntu is the default. Windows Subsystem for Linux is Ubuntu, even though they have close ties with SUSE. So really, I think your first distro should be an Ubuntu-based distro, and I would go so far as to say that Pop! OS is the best one for that. And then there's like a lot of these are just dead. They're listed here, but they don't look at. They actually show them kind of fizzling out. they're not just dead. They just kind of fizzled out. Where's some other good ones? Lubuntu is still kind of there, I guess. I don't even think it is. Mint. So Mint is still alive and well. So Linux, Mint, Cinnamon, Commodore OS. I didn't know they had that. So that's a thing. Edubuntu is kind of going away now. It's not really a thing. Let's see what else we got. So this is all the Ubuntu distros. There's your Parrot. Parrot's a big one. Where's Kali? Is Parrot? So Parrot is Debian based. Is Kali not based even on a Debian? No, it definitely is Ubuntu based, I think. Where's Kali? Let's find Kali. Linux Mint Satanic Edition. I just got stuff on here I didn't even know was here. Let's see here. What do we got? I hope you guys are having some fun debate while I go through this. I'm trying to find. There's Kubuntu. It's for a long time. Just in case you're wondering, a long time the distros they would make a different distro based on the window manager. So thank God that's not a thing anymore. Can I just say, these days, like Endeavor OS comes to mind. When they make a distro like Mint, they make the distro and then they bundle the distro with different window managers, so you can pick the flavor of window manager on the distro. So you don't have Kubuntu and Lubuntu and Ubuntu. I believe Lubuntu is the one that has stripped out all of the Canonical stuff. Canonical, the company who made Ubuntu, is very controversial. It's done a lot of things that have invaded people's privacy, stuff that normally people would be attacking Apple and oh, there's an Lpic out there that's still alive. Wow, that's interesting. This was the first distro to come on a CD that you could run from a CD way back in the day, and we used to save people's computers with that. I'm not seeing Kali on here. Are you guys? Where's Kali? I don't see Kali anywhere. Where is Kali? I know I can't even read what you're saying right now, but Crunchbang is still around. Oh my God, that's like way back. Ubuntu GNOME, Body Dream Studio, Lubuntu. That's the one I think that ripped out. I think that's the first one that ripped out any canonical relations. I don't see Kali there. I think that's interesting because I thought for sure it was based on it. Guess not. Maybe it's here though. Let's see. Nope. So, but Kali is the leading security distro right now in the United States. Parrot's pretty close to that. Raspbian, that's what runs on Raspberry Pi. That's a good one. You can get a Raspberry Pi and run that on there. That's a Debian-based distro. Red Ribbon, Tails. Tails is a really highly secure system where the operating system itself runs over Tor, the Tor network, which is a secure network for but don't depend on it, people. It's less and less secure every day because it's being owned by all the governments. So Storm goes Xandos 64. Man, that's interesting. So they don't put Kali under a Debian base. Slackware, good old Slackware. Slackware, people say, is the oldest distro in current maintenance. It has a completely different way to install things, and none of these are anywhere near mainstream. I mean, none of them. They're like, this is not something I would ever encourage you to use or install. You're just not going to have any usefulness for it outside of. So stay away from the Slack-based distros. SUSE famously, apparently 10 years ago, had a really big relationship with Windows, and I think still does. In the 90s, SUSE was it was German originally, and so it had a big following in what do I want to say? Had a big following in enterprise, and particularly European, and I think it still does. Although it's not nearly as big as any of the Red Hat distros. Oh, good old Caldera. Oh my gosh, talk about a time warp. Mandrake. This is one of my first Red Hat distros right here. Mandrake Linux. Mandriva still around. So Red Hat really came onto the scene in the 90s and 2000 and just dominated the crap out of everybody else, and still does. It still dominates the enterprise. So the fight right now in the enterprise is versus Red Hat. Pretty much, SUSE's still in there, but Red Hat, SUSE, and Ubuntu, which has made great inroads into Ubuntu's largely just for servers, but it's made a lot of inroads. But if these days, so for example, the president of Red Hat, the CEO and president of Red Hat is now IBM's president. I mean, that is the strangest. You thought these times of ours right now were weird and upside down. The fact that the president and CEO of Red Hat is now the president of the IBM Corporation. The only reason he's not a CEO is because he can't have the CEO position in two spots. So there's a figurehead CEO at IBM, but he's effectively the CEO at IBM. He replaced Ginny Rometty. So the fact that you could go from the year 2000 when Red Hat just came onto the scene, everybody was calling Linux viral and everything, to having the president of Red Hat running IBM, like literally running the IBM company, is just mind-boggling to me. It also shows how dead Red Hat is. I think Red Hat is really, not a thing. Many people dramatically disagree with that. But if you're going to work in the enterprise for big organizations, almost all of them are going to have Red Hat. I had to run Fedora. So where is it? So Red Hat you have to pay for a lot. And Fedora, which is one of the Red Hat, there it is, Fedora Core. Fedora was Red Hat's attempt to basically leverage the open source community to help them make their own software that they would then turn around and sell to people. You have to subscribe to updates and everything. Stuff that a lot of that's probably changed since then. There's probably a lot of fighting going on right now in the distro, talking about distros. But the Red Hat Enterprise is hands down. You can get the Red Hat Enterprise certification. This has still got a massive foothold in enterprise. So if you want to work behind the very rich walled gardens of places like IBM and all of IBM's customers, that includes, like any of the Fortune 500, the banks and all that stuff, they are very, very much Red Hat based places. In fact, I ran Fedora on my laptop at IBM for several years, 7, 8, 9 years, because I felt like I wanted to have a distro that used RPM. I made lots of Red Hat Package Manager packages to do the installation. In fact, a lot of the distinction between these distros boils down to the package manager, which I was hoping to talk about a little bit today, but we're going to spend all of Friday talking about the different package managers and sampling them on the different distros. It used to be you could kind of distinguish the Linux distro by its window environment, but because you have servers involved and stuff, probably the biggest distinction between all of these is how they deal with getting software packages onto your system. And that means RPM for Red Hat. It means, I don't even know what SUSE is, AST, I used to have to use, I forget the name of it. But, in Debian, it's a deb file, right? In Arch, it's, the Arch user repository and the Yum tool, the Yay tool or the Pacman tool. So they all deal with how they get software on there differently. And that's pretty much, I think that's the distinct. Yellow Dog is still there. They died. Yep, they died. Turbo Linux is still a thing? No way. Linux PPC, I ran that. Where's Mandrake? Where's Mock? Mock probably isn't here. Mock was the first Linux I ever ran was actually on a PowerPC. So Mandrake, it looks like Mandrake died out. There's some leftovers from Mandrake, but none of these are really significant. Seriously, like the only significant leftover from the Red Hat stuff is Fedora, which is big. It's still huge. CentOS, which is monstrous. CentOS is the closest. If you want it Red Hat Enterprise, CentOS is the closest thing to Red Hat Enterprise. It just took out the Red Hat stuff. And so those are the only ones that I would learn. I would stay with Fedora if you wanted to be Red Hat compatible. But I probably would run CentOS on my server. And than run Red Hat Enterprise. CentOS is one of the only ones that's supported by DigitalOcean, which we're going to do tomorrow. We're going to do the cloud. We're going to set up a couple distros. Scientific is still out there. That's interesting. So Scientific is a Red Hat distribution. I don't think I knew that. And then what do we have down here? Enoch. So Gentoo. I didn't know that Enoch was the ancestor to Gentoo. So Gentoo started a new thing and said, we are going to force you to compile all your software to install. And I might be overstating, simply stating, oversimplifying that, but that's pretty much Gentoo. If you're going to do Gentoo, you're going to be compiling software. It doesn't have an installation thing, last I checked. So it's still fun, but I mean, definitely don't run Gentoo on a Raspberry Pi. You'll be sitting around forever just to get, LS to compile on your system or something. I did not know Chrome OS. Oh, look at this, guys. Chrome OS and Chromium OS are built off Gentoo. Did not know that. I feel like I learned something today. Core OS. Core OS is built off Gentoo? No way. So Core OS was a big deal for a long time, and has a lot of Go in it, actually. And it got turned into Container Linux. It's a Gentoo derivative. I didn't know that. So anyway, and then you got good old Arch. If you talk to somebody on the stream or in the community, there's all kinds of memes about this. Arch is the most popular elite operating system for Linux right now because of the Arch user repository and how up to date it is. Anybody who's doing like a lot of active development seems to be using Arch. And a lot of pen testers are using Arch, and they're building their own distros from vanilla Arch and then putting their own tools on there rather than starting out with the bloat. Manjaro is hands down right now the most popular, user-friendly Arch, and I detest it. I had a horrible experience where Manjaro. The biggest problem with Arch is that Arch is Arch, and you don't use it unless you know what you're doing, or you want to know what you're doing, and you go into it that way. Don't start Arch as a beginner unless you really want to suffer, and you're going to pay for it. And that's fine. And some people say it'll be very educational. I think there's other things to learn before you suffer through an Arch installation. But if you do want, and so a lot of people will reach for one of these happy, pretty distros for Arch, and then that's where Manjaro really fails, because Manjaro comes in and says, hey, I'm a happy Linux. I've actually checked out all of the AUR and made sure all these packages are secure. Bullshit. It never did that. They never once have checked anything out. So they're basically just signing off on it, making you feel more happy about Arch so they can get that sweet enterprise money, because they're trying to be canonical. And they've crossed the line multiple times as an organization and a foundation, and thrown their users under the bus when they have problems, saying, well, you shouldn't have done it that way. You should know better. They treat them like most Arch users treat users, and instead of helping them out like the Ubuntu or the Pop OS people would be doing. And this is why I hate them. They lie to you. They lie to you because they tell you one thing and they totally do something else, and they think something different. Then when you need their help the most, they say, sucks to be you. You just don't get it. You don't belong in the Arch community. When instead they try to tell you, oh no, you can just click on this thing here. So I'm not going to rant anymore about that, but it is my single most hated distribution right now. Of all the distributions on here, I hate Manjaro. And I will never use it or recommend it to anybody else because I got burned by it. Black Arch I like. I am actually building a vanilla Arch right now for pen testing when I'm not writing, back like material for this beginner boost, which is taking all my time right now. But that's what I want to do, is I want to build myself an Arch distro in a VM that I can use to do, pen testing and capture the flag competitions, and not competitions, but that stuff. I'm surprised though that they don't have Interrogos here. So they're actually missing one of the most important Arch distros of all, I think, because it's so new. Endeavor OS, which came from another one called Interrogos. So there's Endeavor OS. This is not Endeavor OS. That is not it. Where is it, people? I should probably just search for Endeavor. I'm not, just so you know, I am not a graphic search guy. I don't use graphic search engines at all, pretty much. Endeavor, did I spell it right? No, I didn't. Maybe I should Endeavor OS. How do you spell Endeavor? Oh, they say it is Endeavor OS. Nope. Why is it? Oh, there it is. Please be the right thing. Yes. So it's OUR. Okay, there we go. So this is Endeavor OS. I'm going to put that in the chat for you and check in with the chat since I haven't looked at it for a while. Anyway, so here you go. There is another distro, another non-distro out there before we... Endeavor OS is not dead. No. Interrogos is dead. And Kali, I don't know. If you want to start with Kali, fine. But Kali is not designed to be a beginner OS. It's constantly getting updated, and it's designed for... let's see. What do you use, and what's your top 2 recommendations for a 3x-year-old developer using Win All My Life? If not, ask too much. So, honestly, I don't. If you, I really think everybody should try Pop! OS as their first OS right now. I haven't seen all the questions. Sorry, guys, I wasn't looking at all of them. That my second recommendation, and I haven't done it yet. But if you don't care about compatibility with Debian, I would seriously give Endeavor OS a try because of all the really great things I'm hearing about it. It may die out really quickly like Interrogos did. I think that these Linux distribution, the Arch distributions that are trying, the ones that are trying to be happy Arch distros, are not, if you don't want to, okay, Linux Mint is the most standard of those in the Ubuntu class. Pop! OS is pretty good there too right now. Pop! OS is as I said, it's my beginner suggestion. I'm actually really excited to try Endeavor OS, but I have no practical experience with it. The lightest Linux distro possible, I want to build one is Arch Vanilla. And that I wouldn't go anything lower than that. And the reason Alpine I've heard is really good. I'm not a fan of Alpine, but I know a lot of people who have it. I have Rancher OS. If you're talking about containers and stuff, I have Rancher OS running on some systems downstairs. Alpine is very lightweight. If you're going to go with lightweight though, at that point I want to pick what's on my system. Usually when I want a lightweight Linux system, I usually want to build it. So that's where Arch comes in, and I've started doing it. I was just going to say Linux from scratch, but we can't talk about LFS because it's not a distro. All right, so strictly speaking, and then we'll talk about that one as we get going, guys. If you want to get the biggest cred in the Linux world, you'll do an LFS. Okay, Linux from scratch. So let's just be really clear. Vanilla Debian's pretty good too. If you were going to start out, Vanilla Debian these days is pretty good. Support for algorithms and engineering. Yeah, it's Pop! OS comes with a lot of really great things by default. That most things that engineers would want. That's why I keep coming back to recommending that. Yeah, LFS is not a distro. Okay, Gentoo is a distro. LFS is a book. And so let's just make sure everybody understands. I'm so tired of people talking about LFS as if it was a distro because I actually got burned by that too. So Linux from scratch is nothing but a book that tells you how to make Linux from scratch. And it is the basis of a lot of embedded systems. Because why? Because we talked a lot about embedded systems earlier. So Linux from scratch, LFS is the main book. So here's the project leader, Linux from scratch. I'll send you this link. And actually, this is I aspire to be able to do LFS. It was written as a teaching tool. It is not a distro, it's a book. Okay, so I'll post my quote. Yes, that would be good if I missed it, sorry. See, I disagree that I think most cred is getting all of the source RPMs for Debian, building them all from scratch and making your own repo and then doing a checks and verification for each of the official details RPMs. Wow. Yeah. Okay, when you're doing Linux from scratch, so people ask what the difference between LFS and Gentoo is. Gentoo is a distro where you have to compile everything, but it's a distro, it's not a book. LFS is a book, and you also have to compile everything, including the kernel. Okay, I think building a Linux system from scratch is the single greatest reputation cred you could have. And I always wanted to do my own LFS and say, this is mine, but it is a huge hassle. And so if you want all of the hassle taken away from you, Vanilla Arch to me is the nice sweet spot. Gentoo calls itself a meta distribution. Interesting. So the Gentoo, as you saw, that's where Chrome OS came from. Gentoo, right? Came from Gentoo. To me, I think Vanilla Arch is even better because Vanilla Arch has the AUR, and the AUR is phenomenally awesome. I don't care what people say about it. The AUR, the idea of being able to share source code in that way, is just so cool. So but Vanilla Arch is like just a basic distro that uses the Arch, AUR. And so if you're going to build your own system, I check over EndeavorOS. If you want an Arch system that is user friendly, my recommendation is EndeavorOS, not Manjaro. If you insist on Manjaro, that's up to you, and you can watch YouTube videos of all the other people who have been burned by Manjaro who ran it for a month and then say, and then it happened. My system stopped working. It was bricked. That's pretty much the Manjaro experience. So circular dependency hell and AUR. Yeah, look, it's not perfect. Okay, it's not perfect, but the idea of being able to more freely distribute your packages for better or worse, it's very unsafe. People, if you're going to go down the Arch distro path, you must understand the security implications of the AUR. The reason Debian-based and our Red Hat systems are better for beginners is because those packages have been vetted. Those packages are looked over for the most part, and people don't put them into the standard package library until they've been accepted. That is not the case for Arch, and you're going to find a lot of people are going to try to troll you and put lots of stuff on there. Yeah, Manjaro is good to at least try it if you want to see. You might actually like it, but you'll find that EndeavorOS or Pop! OS feel the same. What do we got? Let's see. Get respect for not using Windows. Linux users locked down for me on using Ubuntu. Yeah, if you're on Windows, Ubuntu is pretty much the option, right? So WSL is Ubuntu, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's absolutely nothing wrong with Ubuntu. A lot of people say that they've been running Manjaro with no issues. That's usually because you're an Arch user, not a beginner. Okay, and this is not fair because Arch users coming to Manjaro are different than beginners coming to Manjaro, and Manjaro has been trying to attract beginner. WSL can be whatever you want, but it's easier to put Ubuntu on it because it's in the marketplace. That's why I suggest Ubuntu for WSL, because it's the one that comes by default. But yeah, let's see. Not true at all. I use Debian on WSL. I didn't say you couldn't use other distros on it. I said Ubuntu is the default. Okay, when you install it. So that's you can use, there's like 10, you can put Kali on there too. WSL does Kali, it does any kind of distro. And by the way, when you go to the marketplace on Windows, if you're going to do the WSL thing, by the way, WSL is Linux on Windows. Okay, it's Linux on Windows. It's not, you're not installing a separate version of Linux. You're not even doing a virtual machine, although technically under the hood you kind of are. But you're actually going to the Windows Store and saying, I want Kali, I want Ubuntu, I want Debian, and you can install it using the WSL, and then you'll get to use it. Yeah, a lot of people. So Manjaro, I think Manjaro might have learned something from the last massive fail they had when they bricked thousands of people's systems, and they got really beat up over it. So I want to believe that they're a little bit more careful about that. But no, I'm never using them again. And you guys can continue to use it, but people who are paying attention, don't use Manjaro. I bricked my EndeavorOS messing with my NVIDIA drivers the other day. Well, that's totally possible too. And by the way, if you're afraid of bricking your system, don't use Arch at all. Use Pop! OS or something simple. If you need it to get work done, but if you're okay with breaking, by the way, the best way to try out Arch, I think, is in a virtual machine, because then when you break something, you just snap it back and you fix it. It's a really great way to learn. Then you run something ultra stable like Mint that I'm running on this streaming system, because I don't want my stream system to go down. And I don't want to mess with it. I just want it to work. So at that point, you might have to make those changes. So yeah, interesting OS concept. Yeah, Cubes is pretty interesting, I will admit. Yeah, if you're okay with breaking things. Fedora for a new starter, yeah. Fedora is great for a new beginner if you're trying to go into the enterprise market. again, Fedora, guys, Fedora is a very good beginner distro. That's the one I started on and ran for a very long time at IBM with no problems. If you want a Red Hat distro, Fedora is fine. Fedora is fantastic. So go for it. It's a very good pro distro too. Yes, it's good. And to be fair, I don't think packages in Mint are they're checked because they're checked through Ubuntu. Ubuntu checks its packages. Okay, unless you add a PPA. So if you add your own source, those other packages are relatively well vetted and they've been there a long time. They're also ancient. Okay, the biggest problem with the safe distros is how old everything is. Like, I have to have people install the latest NPM or the latest Go because the actual package distros for Go and NPM are ancient. We're talking like 5 years old. So that's the biggest problem with the safe distros. Debian checks their packages, right? Debian is the one who checks their packages, and Ubuntu just runs off the top of that. That's fair. But yeah, Fedora, I don't think Fedora gets nearly as much love as it should. Fedora is a great distro if you are in a Red Hat environment. If you're working with Red Hat all the time. Slackware, unfortunately, does it have 64-bit support? I don't know. Slackware has no sweet spot, so I would not use it. Kali got rid of ifconfig. Oh my gosh, that's interesting. Since some of those distros are so old, why does this mean they're filled with outdated and old systems? At one point, they deprecate and move. Yes, they do. And it's important that you understand. We didn't talk about it, but you need to understand this thing called long time release. So that's called LTS. That means that they release a distro that they don't plan on changing for a very long time, and in order to keep it stable. So this is the thing. You trade stability for safety and ease of use, for modernization. So if you want the latest thing, your stuff's going to break. It's just going to break. So you kind of have to, means the software is even older. Yeah. So can I just say, I found NixOS on the chart. It's its own root starting in 2004. Nice. And actually NixOS, I'm glad you brought that up. Did you find it, Aaron? Because NixOS is the one I've been wanting to play around with too. Where is it? I don't see it. Lindows. Did you find Nix over here someplace? Maybe I can search for it. Nix is going to be a hard thing to find. NixOS. There it is. It's its own. Oh, Puppy's here. Oh, here's all the other little offshoots. Oh, wow. I didn't even notice this whole part. This is cool. This is super cool. So NixOS is here. Yay. I've heard some fun things about this. Geeks. So Geeks is part of Nix, right? So they have a new package manager it's super cool. We had somebody do a presentation on that. Whether that goes, Alpine is its own distro too. Interesting. This is cool. NixOS. Yeah, I've been meaning to try this one. It's one I don't know if I'm going to ever get around to it, but Alpine I've tried. It's super fast and small. I get the sense that a lot of these somebody did Linux from scratch to make them, and they can't list Linux from scratch as the source for this. But I get the feeling that some of these were built by following Linux from scratch. Wow, look at all these new ones. Clear Linux, Rancher OS. I love Rancher OS. Rancher OS, the entire operating system is containers. Everything. Every single thing is containers, including the init scripts and the boot and systemd and everything. Every single thing is a container. Android, of course. I didn't realize Nix predated Android. Huh. I didn't realize it predated it. That's interesting. Puppy's still around. Huh. That's super cool. That's very, very cool. Yeah, back to the fight. So we only have 10 minutes of fighting left. Then it's time for me to do some yoga. Ubuntu LTS, been meaning to use it. Yeah, my biggest complaint with Mint right now, this is the reason I'm thinking about running Arch even for my streaming, is because it can't keep up. It's like Arch was made with Linux from scratch. Was it? Do you know that for a fact? That's good to know. That's interesting. Let's see. Geeks is Nix, but all GNU and Lisp. Oh yeah. In fact, yeah. So the guys who presented are big Lisp fans. Yeah, and that's all they wanted to talk about the whole time. It was like, so OpenSUSE and Tumbleweed, I think those are good too. I just haven't seen them. I haven't heard about them a lot. So other people out in the world of enterprise probably could tell you about SUSE. Somebody told me that SUSE had a close relationship with Microsoft and have had for a long time. Is it true that SUSE is a default on Azure? I can't confirm that, but I've heard that. Does anybody know if that's true? I seem to remember somebody saying that SUSE was the default on Azure. Is that not true? Vera, what is it these days? Do you know? Is it Ubuntu? If I ask a most graphical distro ever, I would probably say Element OS. Element OS is pretty much Mac. Windows, there's no default for Azure. Okay. What did I use at IBM? I used Fedora. The reason I used Fedora for all those years is because I was literally making RPM packages for the software that I helped to develop and manage for systems. So I had to use Red Hat, and so I stayed on Fedora for that reason. And then after I left there, the first operating system I picked was Debian, and I to this day I still think Debian is one of the better distros in the world, just by itself, the Debian system itself. In fact, I would suggest people not rule out the possibility of. So let's say you're not ready for vanilla Arch, right? You could actually throw Ubuntu out and use Debian, and not even use Ubuntu, and like build your own Debian system. But they're going to run into different problems with that. Yeah, Debian's problem is ideology, not quality. That's really the truth. And they don't like putting anything related to like NVIDIA drivers or SYN in the Debian project's mind. A lot of people run vanilla Debian, and people hate Ubuntu because they've sold out. But see, Pop! OS is another one of these sellouts, right? But you know why they're selling out? By actually getting stuff that works on the hardware and combining, purists, like Purism. We should probably we didn't even talk about Purism. Is Purism on there? Where is Purism? Purism is another one of these that there it is. PureOS. What is it? It's a distro. What does it come from? Oh, it's a Debian. Okay, so Purism. Purism is a distro that comes on, or PureOS comes on Purism computers, which are 100% open hardware and open software. And so CubesOS, I haven't ever even played with CubesOS. Is that on the Linux distros list even? We're talking about Linux here, so people were asking about BOS, which was really cool. So CubesOS is a Red Hat derivative. Interesting. So I'll tell you right now, I'm not in Red Hat land anymore because I'm not working on Red Hat systems, so I'm out of the touch with that. But I will tell you this: if I had to work in the enterprise, I would be trying every one of these distros from the Fedora chain, because I would be constantly weighing them against themselves. So I'm super intrigued by CubesOS, to tell you the truth, because it is a Fedora derivative, and some of these other ones. There's Fedora is the main one. I would probably end up staying with Fedora only because it's Red Hat's official open distribution. It's complicated if you're a beginner, but Fedora is Red Hat. In other words, Fedora is the open source project that is run by Red Hat. I think they finally cut the tie. Does anybody know if Fedora finally cut ties with Red Hat officially? I mean, when they first did that, it was a massive controversy. Kind of impact Debian's ideology. I'm sure Vera could help us with that a little bit more. In a nutshell, though, my takeaway is that Fedora is supported by Red Hat, not owned. Well, for a long time, the relationship, yeah, that's what it is. Fedora has Red Hat Enterprise Canary, and that's actually one of the biggest complaints people have against it, is that Red Hat is leveraging the open source community, taking all of their good contributions and making money off them. So there's people in other communities that are really triggered by that. They really, really don't like that. And Snowden endorses CubesOS. Interesting. Might be fun to look at. I'm going to put a note about that one. I haven't really given it a lot of. Again, I haven't been in Red Hat land, but I like to find a good. I like to find a good distro that's in the Red Hat world, the Red Hat ecosystem, the whole RPM ecosystem. I'd like to find one to recommend. Because like my graphic arch recommendation is EndeavourOS right now. My vanilla, like I want to get my feet dirty. It's got horrible hardware support. You think so? Well, I mean, that's really the problem, is the hardware support, right? Official endorsements on this page of that distro. Interesting. You basically have to buy a computer that supports QoS. Oh, right. Well, that's the old days. And is it fair to say, people, what do you think, that's what Debian is? They're asking, well, what is Debian's philosophy? I want to say that Debian is more in the free software front still, that their thinking is more free software. So they do not deal with proprietary hardware drivers and vendors and stuff like that. It's like against the Debian ethos. And somebody could maybe help me out with that, but that's my simplified version of what's different between Debian is just, Debian is FOSS only, and Ubuntu says, screw that, we're going to make it work. And Pop! OS says that even more. Pop! OS is like, look, we want something that is the best possible price point, the best possible operating system for the most possible users of Linux. And we don't care. I mean, we support FOSS, but we don't care if a vendor like NVIDIA decides to give us proprietary stuff. We're going to work with them. And Ubuntu was really the first company, I would suggest, that did that. Red Hat kind of did that, but it was more their own stuff. But, Ubuntu was like, no, I am going to make... I mean, the guy who started it publicly said he was going to make Linux the #1 desktop operating system. He was very, bold in his statements, and to do that meant that he had to make a lot of deals with hardware people, and that really is where Ubuntu forked philosophically from Debian, and then you have Pop! OS, which is doing the same sort of thing. Now, even more so, actually. CubesOS is kind of a hypervisor. Oh, really? Interesting. Yeah, I'm just making notes here. That'd be kind of fun to look at. You guys got me. I'm so happy you guys came to this distro fight. This is a really fun time I'm kind of wrapping up here, but let's just take a moment to just celebrate the possibilities. I mean, here we are fighting about all these distros, but at the end of the day, are we really fighting? Really, it's kind of like a big party. We're in this big freaking party, this big Linux party, because there's so many possibilities, including building your own operating system from scratch. There is a guide. Okay, let's just think about this for a second, guys. There is actually a book about how you can make your own operating system. We live in a time where you can make your own operating system from scratch to run on hardware you can buy for $200-300 down at the store. Now, if that's not exciting to you, then this might not be your thing. Because to me, the amount of range of choice, we fight all the time within the community about what's better and stuff. Sometimes people really fight. But at the end of the day, this is not a fight. This is a celebration. This is a celebration of all of the amazing Linux possibilities. And if there's nothing that gets me more just really passionate and enthused, it is this ability to make anything. You can make anything. You want to make a device driver for a piece of electronics that you soldered together yourself? You can do it. Yeah, you can make anything you want. And that is Linux in a nutshell. That's open source in a nutshell. And that is what is so phenomenally awesome about joining this universe, which the muggles don't even know about. We started at Temple OS. Everyone always mentions it. That's not a Linux distro, by the way. So think about that for a second. Think about that. So we've got all of this possibility. We're not going to fight about it, and we just have to take it all in. And we have to remember too that we are still less than 0.01% of the users in the world. So, it's not an inaccurate statement to say that we kind of have sort of, responsibility is a heavy-handed word, but there is a certain amount of evangelism that are we the 2%? There's a certain amount of evangelism that goes along with this. I'd just like to interject for a moment. What you're referring to as Linux is in fact GNU Linux. Please never call it GNU Linux in my stream again, Aaron. It offends me deeply. I hate that term. And it also pisses off everybody else who contributed to the Linux project that had nothing to do with GNU. And if you want to know my actual feelings on that, go read them inside of William Schott's book. He actually perfectly puts the words around. It's actually just call it Linux and be happy. It's no longer GNU Linux. In fact, if I have my way, GNU will be stripped from Linux by the end of next year or the year after that. Because the GPL-v3 is overbearing and needs to go away. It needs to die. So anyway, I'm going to smoke. There was still, so anyway, copy pasta it's a joke. Oh, okay. Sorry. All you want to do is trigger Rob, mention Manjaro. You know what? I have personal feelings about Manjaro because it hurt me. It hurt my soul. Plus I also had children. I'm not exaggerating. People in 10 years old. Mr. Rob, my computer doesn't work anymore. I clicked on the upgrade and it died. Do you know what the Manjaro response to that is? Oh, sucks to be you. You should have run a terminal TTY with your function keys and then run it from there because it had a graphic element that got upgraded in it, and that's why you bricked your system. Yeah, dummy. That's the Arch response. That was the Manjaro response. And I was like, oh, really? That's what you're going to tell the 10-year-old? Because they're looking up to me like, why is my computer not working anymore? I just want to do my code combat. So you suck. You suck. You use Manjaro. You're not a true Arch user. You should never have used that. But you're from the Manjaro forum. Yeah, but it's Arch. Dude, that actually happened. I mean, who wouldn't get mad at that? Right? Get good, noob. It's like, you should have told him from the beginning. If they'd told him from the beginning, it's like if you told him from the beginning that they were getting into, he would have gone into it with his eyes open. But he went into it thinking it was going to be Pop OS. Which, by the way, I've had 7 kids under 13 years old install Pop OS on a virtual machine, one of whom installed it on their hardware by themselves without any help. Without any help. I sent them to the webpage and I said, go install it. And they said, okay. And they did it. So that's what I like for a beginner experience, especially if they're under 13, under 15, something like that. So this has been a blast. I am going to call it. Does anybody have any ideas on who we should go raid? Maybe we should go raid Aaron. We should go raid you, or we should go raid Beginner Boost or Beginner Bot. Let's see. Can you link to that book, making an OS? Just search for Linux from scratch. Linux from scratch. You Striker up? We could do that. A lot of Arch elitism, and I thought I see it in tongue in cheek. It is. Some of it is tongue in cheek, but people don't get that part. Stallman is a no. Oh, I don't know. Stallman, happy yogaing. Yes, I'm about to go do my. It's a nice day outside. I'm going to do it today. Do it outside today. I definitely need it. Yeah, I do the yoga to keep myself, able to sit for great periods of time. Stallman is just Stallman, and so yeah. And someday I want to make my own Linux from scratch. I really do. And here's the link right here on my screen. I guess that's the link for the LFS that you were asking for. But yeah, GNU actually does have its own kernel. Are you talking about Herd? Yeah, Herd finally got it. Just so you know, Herd is a joke, and people really make memes about it in the community. People can follow the instructions. Yay. Good weather. Yes, here anyway. Never go full Stallman. You get on camera picking your birds. Actually, I've already been captured picking my nose on stream when I didn't think it was on. So maybe in that sense, I can't judge him. Let's see. Not streaming today. You must be in an awkward spot where your preferences for bash, but and you know what? It is very, very hard for me. That is very hard for me. I will openly admit it. Let's do Strager. Okay. And the book for Linux for embedded devices. Oh, you know what? Let me go find that. I'll go get it. Yeah, I think this might be out of date. This is, you can tell that it's not very worn. I've only like perused the thing. It's kind of one of those books that I feel like you could get the information online, just gonna be backwards. But Linux driver development for embedded processors by Alberto Libral de los Rios. And I don't even know if I can truly recommend it yet. It says it's designed for kernel 4.9 LTS. So it's probably already outdated. It's one of the ones I paid the money for way back in the beginning. Yeah, dude, kernel development is yeah, dude, kernel development is like a thing all by itself. So actually, I wrote one. I did my mod probe and my insert, and I made a module for the kernel that printed "Hello World" to the console, and I thought I was gonna shout hallelujah because I was so happy. It's not. If Herd could get it over the line, I don't know about Herd. I'm not a fan of the whole architecture of Herd, which is not a macro kernel, it's a microkernel, if you know what that is. But the kernel is the central piece, is a beginner boost, guys. So I better go away. Okay, we're gonna raid Strager. Raid Strager. Somebody warn him or don't. We'll sneak up on him. We'll sneak up on Strager. Is he there? Is it going through? Is it going through? Yeah. All right. Yeah, it's been fun. Oh wow, that's a pretty big group we got there. Straker's this is gonna be fun scaring the poor guy. Again, tomorrow is Linux in the cloud. Linux in the cloud tomorrow. So if anybody wants to talk about their Azure experience, etc., Linux in the cloud is tomorrow's conversation. Bye. I think you guys, it took, right? Is the raid going? What's the cloud? I know we're going to talk about that. Tell me the raid is going, yeah? Just before I leave, because I'm just going to just tell them hi for me. Yeah, okay. I'm sorry for the timer. You guys can talk amongst yourself. I'm going to go ahead and stop my stream here. All right, people. Ciao.